Hello everyone, I'm the storyteller, and today I'll take you on a spooky story. But don't worry, it will be a gentle and relaxing journey before you drift off to sleep. If you're looking for a tale that's just mysterious enough and gentle enough to relax to, then you've come to the right place. Now, find yourself a comfortable space, close your eyes, and let the story begin. Story 1. The Bathroom Mirror That Shows Upcoming Deaths. I arrived at the Elmsworth Inn on an October evening when the sky had turned the color of lead and the cold winds carried the scent of damp soil through the empty suburban roads. Elmsworth was a modest 3-star hotel, located about 3 miles outside the town center of Warrenton, Maine. There was nothing particularly special about it, except its somber appearance, slightly out of place among the modern hotels clustered around Interstate 95. I rented room 203, a single room on the second floor, with a window facing the parking lot speckled with oil stains and cigarette butts. The receptionist, Marlene, a woman in her 50s with a whispery voice like wind slipping through a crack in the door, looked at me a little too long as I filled out the check-in form. That look wasn't curiosity, it was pity. She asked softly, almost inaudibly, "Are you sure? You want that room?" I looked up. "Is there a problem?" Marlene shook her head, her eyes shifting away from mine. "It's just, never mind. If there's any issue with hot water or the Wi-Fi, just call downstairs." I gave a polite smile, then carried my suitcase up the stairs, because the elevator was under maintenance, according to a handwritten note taped to the wall on the ground floor. Room 203 was unremarkable. Clean single bed, white sheets, green carpet. But one thing unsettled me the moment I stepped in: the bathroom mirror. It was larger than what you'd expect in a 3-star hotel, and it didn't reflect light well. The surface was always foggy, no matter how many times I wiped it with a dry towel. Under the dim yellow light, my reflection looked off, like a distorted copy. I told myself it was the lighting, washed my face, brushed my teeth, and got into bed. But that night I couldn't sleep. At around 2:18 a.m., I woke up to a sound like metal clinking against ceramic tiles. I thought maybe someone dropped something in the bathroom, but I was alone, and the bathroom door was slightly ajar. I got up and walked quietly toward it, turning on the light. The room was empty, nothing out of place, except in the mirror I saw a shadow standing behind me. I turned around, no one, but in the mirror, the shadow remained, faint like smoke. Then slowly, it turned into me, but a grotesque, twisted version. My face, in the reflection, was bruised, blood trickled from my temple, and my neck was bent unnaturally to one side. I screamed and stumbled backward, slamming the medicine cabinet open. When I looked up again, the image was gone. The mirror showed only me, confused, terrified, and trembling. The next morning, I planned to leave early, but when I got to the lobby, Marlene was already at the front desk, eyes weary but alert. "You saw it, didn't you?" I stayed silent for a long moment. "So, what? You saw yourself dead, didn't you?" I froze. No one could have known that detail. I hadn't told anyone. Marlene sighed, then handed me a brown envelope. "The last guest who stayed in room 203 left this. I think you should read it." I opened the envelope. Inside was a folded sheet of paper, scribbled in rushed handwriting. "If you see yourself in the mirror, and it's not who you are right now, leave immediately. I didn't make it. I saw myself. And now I don't have a chance. Signed, Gregory L. Thames. I quickly Googled the name, and I found it. A local news article from 3 weeks ago. The body of a man named Gregory L. Thames was discovered beneath Golden Brook Bridge, his neck broken after falling from the second floor of the Elmsworth Inn. Time of death, 2:18 a.m. Exactly when I saw that strange image in the mirror last night. I shut the laptop, heart pounding against my ribs. That couldn't be a coincidence. It couldn't. And then, a thud echoed from upstairs. I looked at Marlene. She didn't seem surprised. Someone checked into room 305 this morning, she said. If you want to survive, don't let tonight come. I stood there, in the empty lobby, listening to footsteps above, as if someone was running from something. The bathroom mirror burned in my memory, not showing me, but my corpse. Just before the final moment, I decided not to leave the hotel that morning as I had planned, partly because I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Not by anyone specific, but by that face in the mirror from the night before. It kept resurfacing in my mind, like a face submerged in water, struggling to break the surface but never quite rising. It was me, but no longer me. The other reason was what Marlene had said. Don't let tonight arrive. I didn't stay out of curiosity. I stayed because I had the sense that if I left now, I'd never truly escape. That afternoon, I returned to room 203, intending to examine the mirror again. Maybe there were scratches, maybe the lighting played tricks, or so I tried to convince myself. Maybe I had dreamed it all. But when I stepped inside, I noticed the bathroom door was slightly ajar, even though I clearly remembered shutting it tight before I left. Not only that, there was a wet handprint on the mirror, right in the center, as if someone had pressed their face against it while it was still fogged up with steam. But I hadn't taken a shower, and no one else had been in this room since last night. I reached out and touched the mirror. Freezing cold, no condensation, no sign the shower or sink had been used, and yet the handprint remained, fresh, wet, undeniable. I quickly pulled out my phone and snapped a picture. But when I turned the camera toward the mirror, the screen didn't show the room behind me. It showed a different room. Disordered, blood on the floor, a flickering ceiling light, and a woman in a blood-stained nightgown standing with her back to me. I stumbled backward, dropping my phone. My eyes flicked between the real mirror, now back to normal, and the phone screen, still glowing. The other room was still there. Then came a knock at the door. 3 knocks, sharp, precise, cold as bone. I opened the door. A middle-aged man stood there in a maintenance uniform, bearing the Elmsworth Inn logo. His name tag read, Raymond. "Heard you had some trouble with the mirror?" he asked, voice raspy, like he'd smoked for decades. Before I could respond, he walked in. Didn't wait for an invitation. He stared hard at the mirror, then nodded slightly, as if he'd seen this 100 times before. Told him they should have removed that goddamn mirror 10 years ago, he muttered. But they wouldn't listen. Called it a hotel relic. Relic, my ass. I swallowed. You know what's wrong with it? Ramon didn't answer. He stepped closer to the mirror, pulled something from his shirt pocket. A necklace with a blackened bronze pendant. He held it up to the glass, and the second it passed in front of the mirror, the reflection distorted violently. It no longer showed me or Raymond. It showed a man hanging from a rope in this very bathroom. The noose dangled from the ceiling. His eyes were rolled back. His mouth hung open, screaming silently. It wasn't a still image. It moved, like a short film on endless repeat. Raymond stood still. "He was the first," he said. I turned to him. "What?" "First person to die in this room, 14 years ago. Police ruled it suicide. But he told me the night before he died, he saw himself in the mirror. Hanging, he tried to leave, but..." Raymond paused, then locked eyes with me. "Did you see anything?" I hesitated. "I saw myself, but dead." Raymond exhaled long and slow. "Then there's not much time." I followed him down to the maintenance room in the basement, where he kept old records and leftover items from the hotel's earlier days. On a rotting shelf, he pulled out a worn leather-bound notebook, its metal clasp rusted. "This belonged to the original owner," Raymond said, "before the hotel was sold to the current company." I flipped through the pages and found things that had never been in any police report. Mirror in room 203 has never been replaced since hotel opened in 1971. Crafted by glassworker Marcus Kinney under special commission. Silver backing applied by hand. Marcus committed suicide 1 month later, leaving a note, "I've seen myself 3 times." Another entry detailed 3 deaths in the same year, 1982, all with identical circumstances. The roommate woke at 2:18 a.m. to find the victim dead in the bathroom. "Always 2:18, I whispered. Ramon nodded. "The mirror doesn't reflect what is. It reflects what will be, but only once the viewer is marked." "Marked?" I frowned. "Not everyone sees it. Only the ones the mirror chooses. And once they do, no one escapes death, unless..." He paused. "Unless what?" "Unless they do what no one's ever dared to do. Break the mirror." I returned to room 203 with only one thought: destroy it. I rummaged through my suitcase, grabbed my heavy metal flashlight, and gripped it tight. But as I stepped into the room, I froze. In the mirror, it was no longer me. It was the woman in the blood-stained nightgown. But this time, she had turned to face me. Her face had no eyes, just 2 deep, empty pits. And her mouth moved. There was no sound, but I knew exactly what she was saying. I already saw myself. I don't remember how long I stood in front of that mirror. Maybe a few minutes, maybe an hour. What froze me wasn't just the woman's eyeless face. It was what she said. "I've seen myself." That was the last thing said by every person who had died in this room. Gregory L. Thames, the man who hanged himself. The woman I saw through the phone screen. And maybe next, it would be me. I looked down at the metal flashlight in my hand. I'd never intended to damage anything in the hotel, but this was no longer just property. It was an offering. I stepped forward and raised the flashlight high, and I struck the mirror. Crash! A piercing sound rang through the room, but when I opened my eyes, the glass was untouched. Not a crack, not even a scratch. I hit it again, and again, each blow harder than the last. My hands began to bleed where they slipped against the handle. Nothing changed. The mirror didn't break. It didn't even tremble. I staggered back, heart pounding. Not from exhaustion, but because in the mirror I saw myself again. This time, my body was scorched, skin peeling, my mouth open in a silent scream amid flames. I saw myself burning alive. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the corner chair, eyes fixed on the bathroom door. I turned the lights off inside, yet a dim glow still leaked out, like the flicker of a dying candle. Around 2:10 a.m., I heard laughter. Not from the floor above, not from the hallway, from the mirror. A high-pitched, broken laugh, like it came from a throat already crushed. I walked toward the bathroom door, but didn't go in. Just stood there, ear pressed lightly against the frame. And then, someone called my name from inside. Not loud, but clear. Daniel. I froze. No one at the hotel knew my name, except the front desk, and I hadn't spoken to anyone in this room. The next morning, I sought out Raymond again. He was up on the rooftop, fixing the kitchen's ventilation system. When I told him what had happened, he simply shook his head in quiet frustration. No one's ever broken that mirror, Daniel. Why not? Because it's not from this world. He looked at me. It only borrows the form of a mirror. Inside, it's something else. It's alive. I stared at him. You mean it's a being? And Raymond nodded, his eyes darkening. I had a friend who worked here back in 98. His name was Howard. One night, he tried to remove the mirror to replace it. The moment he pried it off the wall, the entire hotel lost power. When we found him, Howard was collapsed on the floor, blood dripping from his nose, eyes wide open, like he'd seen something horrific. Did he survive? He did, but he wasn't the same. Howard stopped speaking. He just sat and drew. Every day, a new piece of paper. Every one of them showed himself dying in a different way. Raymond pulled a crumpled photo from his wallet. It was a scribbled drawing, crude, but horrifyingly vivid. A man being strangled, eyes bulging, blood pouring from his mouth. Howard drew this a week before he hanged himself with the phone cord in the maintenance room. That afternoon, I returned to the room to pack. I decided to leave the hotel, but the moment I opened the door, I froze. Someone was standing in the bathroom. The door was wide open. A woman in a blood-stained nightgown stood with her back to me, shoulders trembling, as if crying. I stepped back, but the door slammed shut behind me. The automatic lock clicked. I was trapped. This isn't real. It can't be, I whispered, trying to pry the door open. But when I turned around, the room was empty. No one in the bathroom, but the mirror. It had changed, no longer transparent. Its surface was now pitch black, like filthy water. And from inside, a pale arm was reaching out, long fingers pressed against the surface, searching for a way through. I screamed and hurled a chair at the mirror. This time, it shattered. Shards exploded everywhere. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. But when I looked up, I saw something that made my skin crawl. My reflection was still there. In the largest shard of glass, I saw myself standing upright, staring down at me, even though I was sitting on the floor. And then, that reflection smiled. I left Elmsworth Inn as night fell. Didn't say a word to Marlene. Didn't say goodbye to Raymond. I drove south, away from Warrenton. But at a rest stop near the Massachusetts border, I entered the restroom. And when I looked up into the mirror, I didn't see myself. I saw room 203, and the mirror there had restored itself. I left Elmsworth Inn believing it was over. The mirror was shattered. I was alive. That was enough, wasn't it? But no, things weren't as simple as I thought. It started when I entered the restroom at a roadside stop, where the mirror didn't reflect me. Instead, it showed room 203 of the Elmsworth Inn, still intact, still dark, and still waiting. And when I looked up again, the mirror had returned to normal. But in that fleeting moment, I knew I hadn't escaped. 3 days later, I tracked down someone named Rachel Carnes, the only person known to have survived after seeing her own reflection in the mirror of room 203. A fact Raymond had vaguely hinted at, but never dared to elaborate. It took me an entire day to find a lead. An old article from 2014 titled "Schizophrenic Woman Claims Bathroom Mirror Shows Her Own Death." Her name was smeared in the media. No one believed her. But she was alive. And that alone was reason enough for me to meet her. Rachel lived in seclusion at a mental health housing unit in Salem, Massachusetts. Her room was small, dim, the windows sealed with newspaper. There were no mirrors, no reflective surfaces of any kind. She opened the door after I knocked 3 times. "You've seen it, haven't you?" she asked before I could even say my name. I nodded. Rachel let me in and poured water into a paper cup. Her hands were thin, trembling. "I saw myself in February 2012, she said. "My head was smashed against the sink. My eyes were bleeding. I tried to leave, but every place I went, every mirror, led me right back to room 203. I said nothing. She was describing exactly what I was beginning to feel. I no longer belonged to the reflected world. "How did you survive?" I asked. Rachel looked at me. Her eyes were red, like she hadn't slept peacefully in years. "By making a deal." A chill ran down my spine. "With who?" "No one. Nothing with a name, nothing with a face, just the thing behind the glass. It doesn't want your soul. It wants your memories, fresh ones, painful ones, fears that haven't yet fully formed. If you give it a memory, one that truly hurts, it will pull back once." I held my breath. "What did you give it?" Rachel turned away, a long pause, then almost a whisper. "I gave it the memories of my daughter, the day she died, every second. The air in the room seemed to freeze. After that," she said quietly, "I never dreamed of her again." I left Rachel's apartment with the terrifying truth. The mirror wasn't just cursed. It was hungry. It chose who could see it. And only when it was fed enough would it let someone live. And I still owed it. That night, in a cheap motel I checked into to rest, I opened an old photo album stored on my laptop. Family pictures, road trips, the last time I saw my mother before she passed. I played a short video from the day she died, a clip I'd never been able to bring myself to watch. I slowed it down second by second. Her face twitched slightly, struggling to say something I'd never quite understood. And as I paused the frame, staring long into her clouded eyes on the screen, the motel's bathroom mirror lit up inside my mind. I turned toward the actual bathroom. The door was ajar. In the mirror, it wasn't me. It was a child, about 8 years old, naked, bruises all over his back, crying silently. It was me. When I was 8, I stepped closer, entranced. The boy looked straight at me, then raised a hand and began to write on the inside of the mirror with blood. "I'll go instead of you." I froze. Then he smiled, a twisted, crooked smile, like he had never known love. And then he vanished. The next morning, I woke up on the floor, right beside the bathroom. In the mirror, I was reflected again, normally, but something had changed. Next to the pillow was a small smear of blood, and in the center of my palm, a bright red X, as if carved into my skin while I slept. I called Rachel. but her number no longer existed. I called the Elmsworth Inn. Disconnected. I called Raymond. No signal. And I understood. The mirror wasn't there anymore. It was with me. Story 2. Eternal Darkness, the shadow that doesn't belong to me. I am Jenna Whitmore, a second-year psychology student at Blackridge University in Maine. By the end of November, the winter wind had begun to sweep through the Morgan Hall building, an old dome where I live with a few other freshmen. For some reason, this semester, the school moved me to the 3rd floor, a floor with fewer residents and almost empty since the start of the year. I didn't question it much. I'm the type of person who doesn't get curious easily. As long as there's a bed, hot water, and peace and quiet, I'm fine living anywhere. But it turns out, it was the silence that killed the normality. That night was a Wednesday. I remember clearly because I had just submitted a late paper to Professor Clarkson. He's the grumpy old man who punishes students for font errors. I returned to my room at 10 p.m., exhausted, my head pounding from 2 hours spent in the freezing library with a laggy computer that hummed like a sigh. When I lay down on my bed, the curtains gently moved from the wind, even though the window was tightly closed. I pulled the thin blanket around me, not thinking much of it, assuming it was the wind seeping through a crack. But then, the light suddenly went out. I jumped up. The entire floor had lost power. No sound, no alarm, no familiar hum of the ventilation system. Just my own breathing and something, like footsteps dragging, echoing from a distant hallway. I grabbed the small flashlight from my drawer, the one my mom insisted I take when I moved in. "You never know when you'll need it," she said. I laughed then, but not now. The faint flashlight beam swept across the room. Everything was the same. Bookshelf, study desk, the round mirror crookedly hanging on the wall. But when I turned the light toward the wall opposite the bed, I saw my shadow. It was just a shadow. At first, I raised my hand. The shadow raised its hand a little slower. I took a step toward the mirror. The shadow followed, but ahead of me by a beat. I froze. The shadow still moved. It turned its head. Then it bent down, slowly, bent unnaturally. It wasn't like any movement of a living person I'd ever seen. Its limbs contorted as if broken in half. Then it crawled up the ceiling. I wanted to scream, but my throat felt like it was being squeezed shut. I turned around. Nothing. I was still standing there, normal. But when I shone the light back, there was no shadow anymore. Only a blank wall in the mirror. Now beginning to fog up, even though the room was freezing cold. I ran into the hallway. The faint light from the duty room 2 doors down gave me some comfort. I ran and knocked on Hallie's door. My roommate, a freshman, who usually blasts K-pop all night. No answer. I tried the next room. Still no response. The duty room at the end of the hall had its door slightly ajar. I gently pushed it open, hoping to find someone on duty. But in the small room, there were only 2 dark CCTV screens, a few old coffee cups, and a radio playing a repetitive, crackling sound. "Don't look back. Don't look back. Don't." I turned it off. On the CCTV screen in the top, right corner, a small white dot blinked. The 3rd floor hallway camera, the one I was standing in, had just detected movement. I pressed rewind. The image appeared. I left my room and ran into the hallway. But before I stepped out, something slithered out from the room I had just left. It didn't have a clear shape, just a twisted patch of darkness, then disappeared when I appeared in the frame. I stepped back, my heart racing. "Is anyone there?" I called down the stairs. Silence. I pulled out my phone to call security, but there was no signal. I couldn't go back to my room, couldn't go down the stairs, because the flashlight started flickering. The light shrank as if being sucked into some place, and then everything went completely dark. No light, no sound, except for the breathing right next to me. You're no longer a part of it. I spun around. No one. It was just my shadow, now appearing beneath my feet, fading away like mist. Then it disappeared entirely. I raised my hand, no shadow. I turned around, walked away trembling, but the flashlight flickered back on. And I realized, on the wall, there wasn't just one shadow, but three shadows. The other two didn't move, but the one in the middle was turning to look at me. I couldn't bring myself to go back to the room. It was impossible. That night, I wandered through the dark hallway, each step feeling heavy, as if someone were watching my every move. I didn't know what to do. Should I seek help? But the night security guard was probably fast asleep. Or should I call someone? But I had no one here except Hallie. And she wasn't answering. All I had was a faint flashlight, flickering and nearly running out of power. I turned to look at the CCTV screen in the surveillance room. It was as if I couldn't believe what I had just seen. I rewound it again, blinking, as though hoping for something different. But no, the shadow was still there, twisting, slithering out of my room and into the hallway. And now, I could see it more clearly. It wasn't just moving like a normal shadow. It was shifting shapes. When it stood up, its figure no longer resembled mine. It was taller, its posture bent in a strange way, as if countless arms were stretching out from all over its body. And then it lunged toward me. A chill swept over me again. My mind went blank. I felt like I was trapped in a dark whirlpool with no escape. The flashlight continued to flicker as if its life was slowly fading. I turned my head back toward my room. The shadow was still there, right on the wall. Suddenly, a faint sound came from the room next door. It was a soft dragging sound, as if someone was slowly moving in the pitch-black room. I stood still, breathing heavily. A feeling of overwhelming fear began to take over. There was nothing I could do but step back toward the stairs. But then I realized something strange. Even though darkness surrounded me, and I was trying my best to stay unnoticed, I could still hear every noise from this hallway, as if someone was right here, beside me. I continued down each step slowly, trying to listen for anything unusual. Everything seemed peaceful, too peaceful, almost eerie. Each step echoed through the silence. The wooden stairs creaked beneath my feet, and when I reached the bottom of the stairs, a door across the way creaked open, its yellow light pulling me in. Then I saw Hallie, my next-door roommate. She was leaning against the door, her eyes vacant, staring through me as though she didn't even notice I was there. "Hallie?" I called softly, stepping closer. She didn't answer, still standing motionless. The light from the room seemed to make her gaze even colder and more detached. The whole room seemed to be evaporating, an eerie, damp coldness wrapping around me. Unable to bear it anymore, I quickly grabbed her hand. That's when she spun around, her eyes wide, bloodshot. You've seen it, haven't you, Jenna? She whispered, her voice echoing in my head. You saw its shadow, didn't you? Fear surged through me. I stood frozen, unable to speak. Hallie smiled, a twisted, terrifying smile. That's not your shadow anymore. It's taken your shadow. You're just an empty shell. The shadow's looking for you, she said in one breath, without pausing. Her eyes began to look strange, as if the light in the room was slowly fading. I stepped back, confused and terrified. My shadow. It took my shadow? Hallie didn't answer. She turned and went back into the room, closing the door behind her, leaving me standing in the hallway, completely lost and unsure of what to do. The coldness enveloped me again. The flashlight in my hand began to flicker and then went out completely. Once again, I was surrounded by darkness. But this time, I felt something different. A dark presence, as if someone was standing behind me, whispering in my ear, though I couldn't see anything. Then I heard breathing, steady, very close. Suddenly, the darkness started to flicker. In a moment, I saw a figure standing silently at the end of the hallway. It was too vague, like a dark cloud drifting toward me. A long shadow with strange arms stretching out. I turned, but I couldn't escape the feeling that it had already surrounded me. I woke up in a chaotic dream. The overwhelming sense of emptiness engulfed me, as if I were in a place without time, space, or anyone but myself. My eyes opened slightly, but there was no light. Everything around me was blurred, as though covered by a thick fog. The feeling of dampness and cold spread into every corner of the room. I didn't know how long I had been asleep, but the feeling lingered. It felt like the shadow was still there, watching me, tracking every movement of mine. I vaguely realized I was still lying in bed, in my dorm room, but everything around me seemed to have changed. I sat up, my head spinning. Looking around, I saw nothing but darkness. The only light was from a flashlight that had long since gone out. The fear surged within me. It's not real anymore, I told myself in my head, trying to convince myself that it was just a nightmare. But a deep part of me knew that it wasn't. I stood up, stepping out of bed. Each step echoed in the silent space, sounding far too loud for the still air. My head felt heavy, but I couldn't calm myself. I felt like something was waiting. I walked into the hallway. This time, I didn't feel the chill I had before. That sensation seemed to have disappeared, but instead, there was a tension, as if someone was standing right behind me, watching me every moment. This wasn't fear. It was something deeper. The feeling that I was being surveilled, controlled. I turned around, but saw nothing. I walked down the stairs, my heart full of anxiety. With every step, I moved farther from the room, closer to the truth I didn't want to face. Only when I reached the ground floor did I hear it. At first, I thought I was hallucinating. But then I realized it was the sound of footsteps. Small, hurried footsteps, as if someone was running. I stopped, trying to listen more clearly. The footsteps were getting closer. And when I looked down the hallway, I saw a figure standing there. It wasn't my shadow. It was a man, wearing a long black coat, his face obscured by the hood. Only his eyes shone in the darkness. "What are you looking for?" I don't know why I asked that, but my voice seemed more shaky than I expected. The man didn't answer. He just stood there, motionless. It was then that I realized. He didn't have a shadow, just like what had happened before. He didn't have his own shadow. "You can't escape it," he said, his voice raspy, as if speaking through thick dust. It won't spare anyone, and it will take everything that belongs to you. What? I didn't understand. I took a step back, but he just stood there, his eyes still locked on me. The shadow, you see it, right? He said again. We're just passers-by in this world. The shadow is what truly lives. A chill spread through my body. I turned, running as fast as I could, but each step felt heavier. The shadow was somewhere, close to me, lurking behind every dark corner of the hallway. It felt like someone was touching me, but when I turned around, there was no one. Then a noise echoed from the surveillance room. I turned around and saw Hallie standing there, looking at me with eyes full of worry. They're here, Jenna, she said, her voice trembling, as if she was afraid of something I couldn't understand. We can't hide anymore. I ran over to her. The shadow, I saw it. It's coming for me. Hallie looked at me, her lips trembling. We can't stop, Jenna. We can't escape it. She grabbed my hand, leading me toward the door. Follow me. We need to do something before it takes everything. The door suddenly opened, and I followed her into a strange room. There was only the dim light from faint lamps and a small altar in the center of the room. Hallie turned to look at me, her eyes filled with despair. This is the only way, but can we do it? I didn't answer. I looked around the room, feeling colder than ever. I felt a cold breeze rush across my back. Not wind. It was something else. Something was coming closer. And then I heard a breath, soft but threatening. Story 3. The Ones Who Breathe in Your Place. I can never forget those mornings when I woke up, feeling exhausted and out of breath, as if an invisible hand was tightening around my neck. Even though I always locked my room door and there was no sign of any break-in, the suffocating feeling never disappeared. It was like a recurring nightmare, and I couldn't explain what was happening. I lived alone in an old boarding house on the outskirts of a small town in the United States. The room I rented wasn't spacious, but for me, it was enough to have privacy, away from the noisy world outside. However, the longer I stayed there, the more I began to feel that something was wrong. On quiet nights, when everyone around me had already fallen asleep, I would hear strange sounds, soft moans, as if someone was suffering in extreme pain. Steady breathing, but not from a human. It sounded like something unfamiliar, something unnatural. I'm not someone who gets easily scared, but the presence of these strange noises started to make me uneasy. I tried to convince myself that it was all just my imagination. But then, that suffocating feeling would come back. One night, after a heavy nightmare, I woke up in the middle of the night, my body exhausted and drenched in cold sweat. The suffocating feeling, heavy, as if an invisible hand was choking me, made it hard to breathe. Looking around the room, I saw that everything was the same as before. Nothing had changed, but there was one strange thing. The door was still locked tightly, and there were no signs of a break-in. I was confused, unable to explain what was happening. How could I feel this way when no one could have entered my room? One day, after waking up from a frightening night, I decided to install an infrared camera in the corner of the room. I wanted to find out if there was something strange happening during the night that I couldn't see when my eyes were closed. That night, after setting up the camera and preparing myself mentally, I fell asleep. The fear and anxiety still kept me tossing and turning, but I tried to close my eyes, hoping to find an explanation for these odd occurrences. The next morning, I woke up with a severe headache. The feeling of exhaustion still clung to me, but I was ready to review what the infrared camera had recorded. I opened the video, my heart pounding. At first, the screen only showed the familiar sight of my room in the dim light of the infrared camera. But then, at dawn, when everyone in the building was still asleep, I saw something strange on the screen. Faint, translucent figures, like mist, silently moved around the room. At first, I only saw one blurry figure standing near the window, but then it moved closer to me. It bent down close to my face, its cold breath seeming to touch my skin. Other figures appeared, all standing there, near my bed, breathing softly. The sensation I felt seeing that scene is indescribable. These were not humans. They couldn't be human. These ghosts had no distinct form, only misty shadows, as if they existed in a different world, a space I couldn't reach. But what shocked me even more were the sounds, the soft breaths, as if those figures were inhaling every breath from my mouth. They weren't just standing there. They were consuming my life. After watching the video, I felt a profound sense of confusion. How could I explain these phenomena? Who were these ghosts? Why could they be so close to me? And why did they need to breathe from my mouth? I couldn't make sense of it, but that question was only the tip of the iceberg. After watching the video, strange changes began to occur in the boarding house. I started to notice that the people living in this building were changing. Gradually, they became pale, their skin dry and brittle, as if all the life had been sucked out of them. Some of them couldn't even open their mouths to speak. Their lips cracked, their tongues stiff. I couldn't understand what was happening, but I could feel the terror spreading in the air. I didn't dare tell anyone about what I had witnessed. I was afraid that if I did, I would become the next target. But the more I stayed there, the more I realized that something was horribly wrong in this boarding house, and I couldn't avoid it forever. For sure, I had been awakened by something terrible, but the scariest thing still hadn't happened. Those figures, the ones breathing in your place, were still waiting for me. I started marking time by the moments I woke up in the middle of the night, no longer morning, noon, or evening. Each of my days was marked by the moment I jolted awake from bed, my throat dry as dust, my heart pounding wildly in my chest, as if someone had just pulled me away from the edge of death. That feeling never went away. In fact, it grew worse. There was even one time I woke up with a small trickle of blood coming from the corner of my mouth. No coughing, no impact, just blood. A sign that life itself was being drained away. I tried to leave the boarding house. I really did. I packed up my things one Monday afternoon, with the sun still faintly shining through the trees outside the parking lot, offering a fragile comfort. I drove away, leaving that place, heading to a small hotel about 10 miles outside of town. I stayed there that night, thinking everything would end, but I was wrong. My camera, the one I brought with me, was still recording that night. I set it up facing the bed as a test, and at 3:12 a.m., it caught them. Not in the boarding house, not in that old place, but right there, at the hotel. A figure, misty like thin smoke, slowly appeared at the edge of the bed. It wasn't sudden. It slipped in like fog through a crack in the door, floating through the air, and stopped right in front of me. The figure leaned down, and I, in the video, began to breathe heavily. The next morning, I returned to the boarding house. Not because I wanted to, but because I knew there was no other place that could help me escape. The problem wasn't the room. It was me. The room next to mine, 2B, was rented by an elderly woman named Mrs. Gertrude. She lived alone, quietly, and rarely left her room. I'd never spoken to her, but the night after I returned to the boarding house, I saw her door slightly ajar. A strange instinct made me stop. I peered through the crack in the door. In the darkness, I saw her tiny frame, sitting motionless on the bed, facing the window, her back to me. She didn't move, not an inch. And the most terrifying thing, I could see that her shadow wasn't reflected under the wall light from the hallway. Just a deep black void. Empty. I gently pushed the door open and called, "Mrs. Gertrude? I just wanted to check if you're okay." No answer. I stepped a few more steps in, my breath freezing in my throat. The room was as cold as a freezer. When I got close to her, I saw her face shriveled and hollow. Her eyes were sunken, her mouth slightly open, as if still trying to breathe. But her breath wasn't escaping. Her lips were turning purple. Before I could understand what was happening, I heard the sound of breathing, but not from her. The sound came from behind me. I spun around. There was no one. From that day on, I began to watch the people in the boarding house. They didn't know, but I observed in secret, and I noticed they were slowly changing. No one said anything. No one complained. But I could see their eyes becoming cloudier with each passing day. Their movements grew slower, as if they were fighting against an invisible weight. A man named Carl, in room 3D, who used to be the night security guard, now slept incessantly throughout the day. When I knocked on his door to check on him, he opened it with shaking hands, the smell of mold and disinfectant wafting from him like a corpse. "I'm so tired, like someone is living off of me," he mumbled before closing the door. I started to believe in a crazy theory. There was something parasitic living on us. Something that didn't need food, didn't need light, just needed breath. I called the police. I told them everything, even sent them the video. But the only response I got was, "We didn't see anything unusual in the video. Your camera might be malfunctioning." No one believed me. No one wanted to believe. I decided to try something. A dangerous act. I borrowed a CO2 meter from an acquaintance to measure the air quality in the room at night. If they were really sucking the breath out of us, the air should change. I also placed a small mouse in a glass cage right beside my bed. If my breath was being drained, would a small living creature like that be affected? I set up the camera to record, and that night, I lay in wait. At around 2:47 a.m., I woke up. A chill spread from the palms of my hands up my spine. The air was thick. I tried to keep my eyes shut, not moving. I heard a faint hissing sound, like fire crackling at the bottom of a pot. Then a strange breath, a long, deep, dry one, came right next to my ear. I didn't dare open my eyes, but I could feel it. There was another face, very close, just inches away from me. It didn't touch me, but I could feel its presence, like a dense mass of air trying to push through my skin. through every pore to pull something out from inside me. I fainted without realizing it. The next morning, I watched the footage. The CO2 meter had spiked to 3 times the safe level within 10 minutes, then returned to normal as if nothing had happened. But what stopped my breath was the last frame. The mouse in the glass cage, dead, its eyes wide open, its mouth agape, its body deflated, as if sucked empty. I don't know how much longer I can last. The room is no longer just a place to sleep. It's where they come to breathe for me. They don't need food. They don't need blood. They don't need souls. They just need breath. The only thing left for me to feel alive. And tonight, I see a bruise, finger-shaped, on my neck. They're not just breathing for me anymore. They're learning to breathe through my body. There is something in the night wind in this boarding house. A faint, foul smell, seemingly rooted in the dust, the rotting wood, and the old iron door that creaks every time someone steps out of a room. But tonight, the smell is stronger. It lingers in the air like a whisper, like the final breath of someone just drained of life. Since the night I discovered the bruise marks shaped like fingers around my neck, I began losing sleep. Not because I couldn't fall asleep, but because I was too afraid to sleep anymore. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined some unseen face leaning down to drain the last breath from my lungs. And the next time, maybe I wouldn't wake up. I tried everything to keep myself awake. Strong coffee, stimulants, even using a stapler to hurt myself. But how long can the human body endure? I drifted off one gloomy afternoon when the rain kept pouring incessantly. And I dreamt again. In the dream, I stood in a strange room, yet too familiar. It was like my dorm room, but there were no windows, no exits. Just 4 walls, empty and seemingly breathing. I could hear a heartbeat, not mine, but the room's. The wall gently trembled, like a chest rising and falling. I stood in the center of the room. Around me, from the dark corners, shadows slowly crawled out. Not hurriedly, not in a rush, but surely. They didn't walk on feet, but seemed to glide. These shadowy figures had no faces, just dull, murky masses, with a dark hollow where a mouth should be. They inhaled, all at once. The room breathed heavily, and I could no longer breathe in. The sensation was worse than suffocating. I wasn't just losing my breath, but I could hear it leaving my body. A thin, weak stream of air, fading into the space, mingling with the gasps of those who had no lungs. I jolted awake, sitting up with a dry throat. A thin stream of blood trickled from my nose. There was a handprint on my shirt, as if someone had placed their cold palm on my chest and pressed down while I slept. That night, I decided to visit the landlord, Mr. Mallory, an elderly man who often sat on the porch sipping whiskey with an old wooden cane resting on his knee. He lived in a small house next to the boarding house, always locked up, never interacting much with the tenants. But I had no other choice. When I told him I suspected there was something in the boarding house, his eyes flickered as if I had spoken something forbidden. "I know what you're seeing," he said quietly. "I've seen it since 1987, ever since my daughter, Maggie, died in the very room you're renting." I went silent. Mr. Mallory explained that the place had once been an old nursing home, left abandoned for nearly 2 decades. He bought it cheaply, renovated it into a boarding house for extra income. But no one told him that the last people who had lived here never left. Old people, they often die quietly. They don't get a proper send-off. No one visits. And I think, because no one heard their last breaths, they stayed behind, still seeking breath. I shivered. He added, some of them are no longer human, boy. They exist between two worlds. They don't eat. They don't sleep. They breathe for the weakest ones. And then they take them. On my way back to my room, I suddenly heard crying coming from room 2B, the room of Mrs. Gertrude. But she was dead. I had seen her body carried away on a stretcher. The crying wasn't loud. It was soft, like someone being strangled. Unable to let out a full cry, I pressed my ear against the door. A whisper came from inside, hurried. It's not me. It's not me crying. I ran. I couldn't keep going like this. I needed evidence, clear proof. I needed someone else to see what I saw, so I wouldn't have to carry this terror alone. I turned to a specialist in paranormal investigations, Clarissa, a researcher who had worked on cases of disappearances related to sleep paralysis and shadow beings. I sent her all my videos, audio recordings, gas meter data, injury photos, and even my dreams. She responded just one day later, what you're experiencing is very similar to an ancient phenomenon recorded in Babylonian inscriptions. Nafasu, meaning the breath stealer. They don't kill by violence. They wait until the victim falls into a deep sleep and slowly steal their breath until the body can no longer resist. The only thing keeping you alive, Clarissa continued, is your awareness. You're staying conscious in your sleep, but once you let your guard down, they won't need your breath anymore. They'll stay inside you forever. Tonight, I cleaned up everything in my room. I sprinkled salt around my bed as Clarissa instructed, trying to create a temporary barrier. I taped small mirrors to the four corners of the room to reflect the night's images. I turned on red lights, set up the microphone, camera, and gas meter. And I sat there, waiting. No more fear, no more running. I wanted to know, if they breathe for me, then who are they? Story 4. Death in the picture. One by one. They disappear. I remember clearly the day the class photo was hung in the hallway of the main building. It was a university class photo with the faces of 40 students, all smiling, happy. It was placed right next to the door of the large classroom, where every student passed by on their way to class. To me, it was part of my first memory of those days full of excitement and hope for the future. But no one could have guessed that this photo would become a prophecy of our deaths. Death came like a strange breeze. At first, no one noticed. As the lessons went on, the photo seemed unchanged. Every face remained present, still smiling, as usual. But after each week, something strange started to happen. The faces in the photo began to fade. Every time I looked again, I noticed someone was missing. And then one day, I realized the person missing from the photo was Lily, my best friend, who always sat next to me in class. Lily didn't just disappear from the photo. She vanished from my life entirely. We searched for her everywhere, asked friends, teachers, but no one knew where she had gone. Strangely, during our search, we received a phone call. The voice on the other end was very faint, as if from a place far away. "Lily is no longer here," the voice whispered softly into the phone. "She has left and will never return." That was when I began to feel a chill run down my spine. We quickly organized a meeting with friends where everyone was confused and worried. But just one day later, I received a strange message from an unfamiliar number. Stop searching, they will come, and we will leave soon. We didn't understand what it meant until the third day when I received another call, this time from a doctor at a nearby hospital. They had found someone, not Lily, but another student, Nathan, someone I rarely spoke to. Nathan was found in an abandoned house near the school. He had been dead for a long time, but his body showed no signs of decay. His face still held the smile from the class photo, but his skin had turned gray, his mouth wide open as if he were trying to call out to someone. His eyes were no longer open, but those eyes seemed to be staring directly at me, as if an invisible message was being sent. From that moment on, strange events began to happen. Every week, another student disappeared from the photo. Each person met a similar death. Their bodies dried out, skin turned gray, and mouths wide open. That death seemed to be a vicious cycle that we couldn't escape. At times, I began to doubt myself. One day, as I walked down the hallway and looked at the photo, I suddenly felt a coldness seep through my skin. A shadowy figure appeared beside me. I looked up and I saw myself. It was me, but not quite me. My face in the photo gradually began to fade, just like the others, as if I were disappearing from my own life. I quickly turned away, but when I looked at the photo again, everything was as it had been. However, I felt a change that I couldn't explain. With each passing day, the number of people in the photo dwindled. Those who remained could feel the growing sense of dread. We didn't speak about it, but each of us could feel the presence of death hovering nearby. No one dared to stay in the hallway longer than necessary. The fearful glances, the awkward gestures, and the sighs as we walked past the photo made the atmosphere heavier. I knew something greater than us was waiting. An invisible force, untouchable, was silently pulling us into a vortex with no escape. Every time I looked at the photo, I saw the faces fading, as if time itself was eroding our presence. And I didn't know if I could escape this. But one thing I was certain of: we were trapped in an unbreakable cycle. The faces in the photo didn't just represent the people who had died, but also served as a testament to what we would soon face. Silent death, noiseless but certainly unavoidable. I no longer saw anyone else. It was just me in the photo. And I, like those before me, was also fading, slowly losing my presence. I started losing sleep after Nathan's death. The fear not only followed me in my waking moments but also crept into my dreams. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the empty hallway with flickering fluorescent lights and the glass photo, as if it was gasping for breath. It was no longer an inanimate object. It was alive, watching every step and remembering. It chose. The fourth week passed, and the next person to disappear was Brittany, a quiet, introverted friend who usually sat at the back of the class, unnoticed by most. But it was her silence that sent chills down my spine when I remembered the recent days. I had seen Brittany standing in front of the class photo for hours, during lunchtime or when the hallway was empty. She just stared at it, as if trying to hear a whisper that ordinary people couldn't sense. 3 days after she disappeared from class, her body was found in the dormitory basement, pressed against the wall as if it had been sucked into it. Her body was dried out, her eyes wide open, her mouth agape, frozen. On the wall behind her was a handprint made of something dark and thick, almost like old dried blood. The handprint was small, unnaturally so, like that of a child, but with unnaturally long, thin fingers, like dry twigs. I no longer had any doubts. This was no coincidence. This was a curse. After Brittany's death, whispers began to spread around the class. Some said it was some cruel game. Others blamed Professor Richardson, the one who had suggested the idea of taking a class photo at the start of the year with unusual enthusiasm. Some students even spread rumors that he had been involved in a mass student accident in the 80s, also here on this very campus. But all of it was just speculation, rumors. Until one night, I received an email. No subject, no sender. Only one attachment. Photo Class 2 JPG. I opened the file and my whole body went cold. It was another class photo. Not the one hanging in the hallway, but a photo of us, taken on the same day, in the same pose, with the same people. But here, everyone was staring in one direction, not at the camera, but to the right, towards something no one knew. No one was in the frame. But the most horrifying part was that at the far right edge of the photo, neatly fitting in the frame, was a creature. It was unclear, like a shadow melting into the bright background. The shape was blurry, but I could make out two deep eye sockets and a mouth without lips. Just a dark void stretching all the way to the ear. I immediately unplugged my computer. I couldn't bear to look any longer. But from that moment on, I began to hear knocking. Every night, exactly at 3:03 a.m. At first, it was a light tap, like nails gently tapping on glass. Then, it grew more frantic. I once bravely cracked open the door to look outside. But there was no one there. Just the empty hallway. And the photo, which seemed to have changed. The class photo hanging in the hallway. I began to notice it not only lost the people who had died, but also changed the gaze of those still alive. Their eyes no longer looked at the camera, but they looked at those walking by. They looked straight at me. I told a few of my living friends about this, including Maya, my roommate, and Darren, the documentary-loving guy, who always believed there was some force controlling our fate. The three of us decided to sneak into the school's archive room to look at all the class photos from past years. We broke into the administrative building at 1 a.m. Under the dim light of our flashlights, dozens of class photos covered the walls. But when we closely examined the older class photos, I shuddered as I realized a recurring pattern. About every 10-15 years, there was a photo where the number of people decreased each week, just like us. And in each case, no students survived past the first semester. Something is picking us off, one by one, Maya whispered, her voice trembling. It's not a virus, not murder. It's erasing. Darren then pulled out a tattered file from a drawer, thick with dust, like ash. The cover read, Project Eclipsa, do not circulate after 1987. Inside were handwritten records, crime scene photos, and testimonies from a group of students. The class of 1986. They too had been erased from the class photo, gradually. But the last thing that made me choke up was the last note. Scribbled in red ink, the last one always receives all the memories of those who have disappeared. I collapsed onto the floor. I was the last one left in the photo. was fading away. But that wasn't the worst part. In another page tucked in the file, there was a printout of the third photo, taken in a different space. Not the hallway, not the campus grounds, but a room full of darkness. In it, each student sat motionless, their black eyes, their mouths wide open, just like when they were found in real life. And I was there, faint, but becoming clearer each day. The third photo was not taken on campus. It was taken in another world, and I was being pulled into it. We no longer went to class. Maya whispered to me one morning as we both woke up after a restless night filled with strange noises. There's no reason to stay there anymore. The survivors are all hiding. And it was true. There were only 8 of us left in the photo. We counted. Every morning, we would go to the second floor hallway and look up at the photo hanging in a dark wooden frame. No one said anything. No one cried. We just counted, as if it was all we could do before it was our turn. I knew my time was running out. In the photo, my body started to blur like smoke, no longer as sharp as before. I didn't dare look for long, didn't dare let my gaze meet the eyes in the photo, because I feared what was staring back at me from behind the glass was no longer truly me. That was when I decided to speak to Professor Richardson. He was a mysterious figure, reserved, always carrying an old pocket watch and never smiling. But I remembered his name in the records of Project Eclipsa, mentioned as a former research assistant under Dr. Holloway, the head of the project. I went to his office on a Tuesday afternoon when the late autumn sunlight shone through the dusty window frame, casting faint, ghostly streaks like forgotten souls. His office was colder than the rest of the building. The air smelled like old paper and disinfectant. Professor looked at me through his round glasses, silent for a long moment before speaking softly. "Have you seen the third photo?" I froze. I was once part of the research team on the ghost images phenomenon, he said, his eyes not leaving the pocket watch. At first, we thought it was just light exposure distortion. But the more we researched, the more we realized. The photo doesn't just capture an image, it captures the soul. He told me about a series of experiments in the 80s. They took successive photos of a group of people under various lighting and spatial conditions, attempting to prove that the human soul could be recorded. In most of the final photos, there seemed to be a shifting presence. The people in the photos began to fade from reality. Project Eclipsa was shut down because all the participants eventually died, their mouths wide open. No one survived. I held my breath. So our class photo, it's a cursed copy of the Eclipsa camera. It was lost, but I'm afraid someone found it and reused it. Earlier this year. He mumbled, then suddenly looked at me, his expression serious, as if, for the first time, he was truly awake. "You must find the mirror." "Mirror? There's an old restroom behind the library. It used to be the dark room. Inside, there's a mirror linked to the original experiment. Just stand in front of the mirror and face yourself. You'll see them." Maya, Darren, and I sneaked into the library at midnight. It was raining heavily outside, and the musty smell crept through every crack in the basement floor. We followed the dark hallway, using a small flashlight, passing hundreds of forgotten books. Behind an old wooden door, we found the room. Inside, it was pitch dark, and the flashlight illuminated dusty walls with peeling paint. But at the far end of the room, stood a full-length mirror covered by a black cloth. I pulled the cloth off. The mirror appeared, and immediately I saw them, not me, but the dead. Nathan, Brittany, Lily, all standing behind me in the mirror, staring. They didn't move, just stood still, their mouths wide open and eyes devoid of life. But what made me want to scream was that they were touching the wall inside the mirror, tapping gently. Tap, 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 1, then 2, then 3. Taps echoed in the cold air. Darren whispered, "They're trapped on the other side." Maya trembled. "Can we pull them out?" "No," I whispered, feeling a cold breeze crawl up my spine. "We're being pulled in." I turned around, and at that instant, the mirror darkened. No one was there. Only the faint reflection of 3 confused figures standing in the middle of a deathly room. We ran. 3 days later, Darren disappeared from the photo. His body was found in the men's bathroom in the north dormitory, but this time, something was different. Instead of being stiff like the previous victims, Darren's body was stretched out, as though it were in the process of being copied. His skin was still damp. His eyes still had faint movement, even though the doctors confirmed his heart had stopped hours before. And in the mirror of his room, exactly where he was found, there was a message written in steam, as if drawn from within. "Don't let it reflect your name." I realized this was no longer a game of death. It was a ritual, an ancient ritual leaked through photographic technology. The photo was the gateway, the mirror was the hand that pulled, and the last person was the final offering, keeping it alive in this world. Now, only 4 of us remained in the photo, and every time I sleep, I find myself walking into the endless hallway, where the lights flicker and bony hands gently tap the glass. Always 3 taps. Tap, tap, tap. Story 5. An Invitation from the Afterlife. My name is Rachel Martin, a second-year psychology student at Oak Ridge University in Wisconsin. The dormitory I live in is called Evermore Hall, a 3-story red brick building that is over 80 years old. It used to be a nursing home in the 1940s. They say there was a big fire here once, which destroyed half of the north wing, forcing it to be rebuilt from the ground up. But the south wing, where my room is, still retains its original structure. And there's something about it, cold, out of place, compared to the rest. I live with my roommate, Natalie. She's the energetic type, fond of collecting night lights and fabric bracelets. The walls of our room are covered with instant photos and shelves filled with scented candles. But none of that can dispel the uneasy feeling I always get whenever I walk down the second-floor hallway after midnight. There's a cold breeze, even though no windows are open. And sometimes I hear something like a clack, clop, clop, as if someone is walking behind me in wooden shoes. On the 5th night of the second week of the fall semester, everything started. At 11:46 p.m., the power went out. I was sitting at my desk, studying by the light of my laptop, when the lights in the entire dorm suddenly went out. After a heartbeat, I heard Natalie's voice from the top bunk. "Not again? The power's always going out." She turned on the flashlight from her phone and scanned the room. I smiled reassuringly, but honestly, anxiety was starting to stir inside me. Almost immediately, a soft knocking sound came from the window next to my desk. Knock, knock, knock. 3 knocks, spaced evenly, faint like someone tapping their fingers on the glass. I turned around abruptly. Natalie did too. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice lowered. I slowly walked toward the window. The glass was fogged with a thin layer of mist, but outside, I swear I saw a figure. A girl, standing still. She wore a long black cloak that reached her heels, her hair hanging down to cover her face, and her lips, though unclear, were moving slowly, as if whispering something. No sound came out, just the repetitive motion of her mouth. I immediately pulled the curtain shut, my heart pounding. "Probably just someone playing a prank," Natalie mumbled. But I could see she was starting to shiver. The power was out for nearly an hour. When the lights came back on, we realized the door to our room wasn't locked. No one remembered opening it. The next day, the dorm was shaken by the news that Ava Stern, a freshman in room 207, had died during the night. "Drained of blood," the guard said to a group of students in the cafeteria. Her eyes wide open, like she saw something terrible. But no wounds, no blood. The police arrived, cordoned off the area. They didn't let anyone into Ava's room, but rumors spread like wildfire. A girl from the same floor said Ava had opened the door after hearing knocks on the window when the power went out. I looked at Natalie, both of us pale. "It's just like last night," I said. 2 days later, the power went out again, around midnight as usual. Natalie and I decided not to sleep. Locking both the front door and the windows, we focused on every sound, our breaths tight as a drawn string. Knock, knock, knock. This time, it was on the front door. 3 knocks, just like before. I held my breath. No one moved. Then, a faint female voice came from outside. "I'm cold. Let me in." The whispering voice lingered, as though it was coming from a throat that was strangled. Natalie burst into tears. We crawled under the bed, holding each other's hands. The voice repeated, "I'm cold. Let me in." I don't know how long it passed, but when the lights came back on, the whispering stopped, and a small blood stain appeared on the doorknob, like a wet blood fingerprint pressed against it. I began to investigate. At the school library, I went through old records about Evermore Hall. After hours of searching, I found a news article from 1956. A female patient, age 17, escaped from the psychiatric treatment room, believed to have jumped to her death from the old South Wing building during a power outage. She had previously exhibited strange behavior, standing at other people's doors and whispering to be let in. Her name was not recorded. She was only referred to as Black Veil Girl. When I told Natalie everything, she shuddered. "We have to leave." I nodded. But that night, another person died. Emily, a classmate of mine, on the 3rd floor. She opened the window when the power went out, after seeing someone whispering her name from outside. The body was dried like a mummy. No wounds, no blood. At that point, I realized she wasn't just knocking on doors anymore. She was starting to look directly at us. Every night, a little closer. I don't know how many more nights without power there will be. But if you're ever in an old dormitory somewhere, and the lights go out right at midnight, don't open the door. No matter who's knocking or whispering, don't open it. I hadn't slept for 3 nights straight since Emily's death. Natalie moved to stay with her aunt in another state the very next morning, bringing with her all her blankets, scented candles, and the bracelets she once believed would protect against negative energy. As for me, I had nowhere to go. My family was in Minnesota, and my semester couldn't be deferred. I was still here, alone in room 205, cold as ice, with the dim light spilling from the desk lamp, the only thing I left on through the night. The windows, I sealed them with tape and blankets, but sometimes I could still hear the whispering, "I'm cold. Let me in." Just the wind, I told myself. Wind through the cracks in the old brick walls, making silly noises. But my heart still skipped a beat every time the knocking came. 3 knocks. Knock, knock, knock from the hallway. The police hadn't released any new updates. The school issued a statement saying no signs of foul play, and that Emily might have suffered an unexplained medical event. Dried up, no blood, eyes wide open. Do they really think the students will believe that? I don't believe it. I know she's still here, the girl in the black dress. And I need to find out what's keeping her spirit tied to this place. I started with the basement. Evermore Hall has a deep basement, rarely visited, where cleaning supplies and old electrical equipment are stored. But when I asked the old security guard, Luther, about the old blueprints, he frowned and whispered, "You shouldn't go down there. Down in the basement, there's a cold storage room that's been locked since 1956. No one's used it. The steel door is thick, but sometimes I hear someone knocking from inside." I shuddered. Has anyone ever opened it? He shook his head. The key's been lost, and maybe it should stay that way. That night I sneaked down to the basement. The hallway lights flickered, my shadow stretched out across the rough concrete floor. I followed the hallway to the end, just as Luther had pointed. And sure enough, there was an old steel door, sealed shut, with a rusted metal sign reading Freezer 1B, Do Not Open. I pressed my ear against the door. Silence. Then, knock, knock, knock from inside. I recoiled, stepping back, nearly losing my balance. No, it couldn't be. This couldn't be real. But the handprints, 5 small dark handprints pressed into the steel, as if someone had placed a bloodied hand against the inside of the door. I returned to my room shaking, but this time, I wasn't just a bystander. I wanted to understand. I needed to know why she was knocking and asking to be let in. I sought out Professor Sarah McKinley, the retired elderly professor who had written a thesis on the history of Oak Ridge and the local folklore of Wisconsin. She welcomed me into her small home filled with books, the scent of lavender mixing with the dust of old paper. I handed her the news clipping from 1956, the note about the anonymous girl. McKinley looked at it, then fell silent for a few seconds. Her name was Eleanor Dace. I blinked. You knew her? I knew her. My grandmother was a nurse at that nursing home. Eleanor was the only patient locked away in the cold room because she would have panic attacks whenever it rained or the power went out. They said she saw the ghost of her mother, who had committed suicide by opening the window and stepping out. I swallowed hard. Eleanor believed that if anyone opened the door for her, she could take her mother's soul, escape the cold. I shuddered. Everything began to click into place. Every time the power went out, the knocking, the whispering for admission, and the ones who opened the door, dried up, as if drained of warmth, drained of blood. The next day, I returned to the dorm to find a horrifying sight. Room 210, a room that had been empty for a week, its door wide open, with a puddle of cold water inside, and wet footprints leading from the window to the middle of the room. Then, disappearing. No one saw anyone go in. No one saw anyone go out. I asked Luther, and he said, no one's been given access to that room. I glanced at the window. Its curtain torn that night. The entire second floor wing lost power again. I locked my door and sat cold in the corner with a small candle. I knew there would be knocking, but this time I wanted to hear it clearly. Knock, knock, knock. I didn't move. Then a whisper. I'm cold. Let me in. I don't want to stay in the dark anymore. And then the whisper I had never heard before. I've seen you in my dream. My heart seemed to stop. She was coming for me. I stayed awake all night. The next morning, I made up my mind. I had to open that cold storage room, no matter what. Because only when I understood what she was, could I stop her. I couldn't stop anymore. The truth about Eleanor Dace was gradually being revealed, but there were still too many mysteries I had to uncover. I couldn't live in fear for so many days like this. I needed to understand why the girl in the black dress appeared every time the lights flickered off, and why people like me were her targets. I decided to take a daring step. I had to enter the cold storage room. As always, I turned to Luther, the elderly guard who had lived at Evermore Hall his entire life. When I asked about accessing the cold storage room, he fell silent for a long moment. His eyes were swollen from lack of sleep, but he still shook his head. You don't understand. Open that door, and you'll see something that no one can erase. I didn't want to hear more. I knew he was trying to protect me, but now I couldn't turn back. Where's the key? I asked firmly. He sighed. After a moment of hesitation, Luther stood up, walked behind the security desk, and pulled out a large steel key. You won't be able to go back to how things were. But if you still decide to do this, I'll go with you. I nodded, my resolve firm. The danger was far greater than death. I had to know the truth. Walking in the cold darkness of the basement hallway, I couldn't shake the chilling feelings surrounding me. Luther and I walked slowly past the old cracked walls until we reached the giant steel door. Luther used the key to open it. The eerie sound of the lock echoed like the laughter of a restless soul. The door creaked open heavily, and I could barely breathe. Inside the cold storage room, there was only a bitter cold air, and the faint light from Luther's flashlight illuminated only a part of the room. I couldn't believe my eyes. There were dozens of empty hospital beds lined along the walls, the sheets still stained with old dried marks. Each bed was covered with a white sheet. They looked like unburied corpses. In the middle of the room, a large laboratory table covered in thick dust stood. But on the table was an ancient mirror, looking like it had existed for centuries. I stepped closer to the mirror, though my heart was filled with confusion. In the mirror, nothing reflected but a foggy mist. Suddenly, I saw a shadowy figure appear behind me in the mirror. But when I turned around, no one was there. I looked back at the mirror, and then I saw her. The girl in the black dress. She stood there, right behind me, her eyes wide open, staring at me, but her mouth made no sound. Her fingers stretched out as if she wanted to touch me. Only wind and a cold breeze came from the mirror. She's not human, Luther whispered, his face ashen, as though he had seen this many times before. I turned to Luther. Luther, who is she? He shook his head. unable to say anything. But I knew he couldn't hide it anymore. At that moment, I realized something was wrong. Although the cold sensation suddenly spread throughout the cold storage room, I felt something strange. The door had closed. Not just simply closed, but it had locked. It couldn't be opened. I tried twisting the doorknob, but it was stiff, as if some invisible force was holding it shut. Luther panicked, but I could see he couldn't do anything. It seemed like he knew about this, knew that once the cold storage door was shut, there would be no way to open it again. Then I heard a noise, gentle and steady, like something was knocking softly on the door. Knock, knock, knock. The knocking seemed to be getting closer, as if someone was walking toward me. Getting nearer, my heart seemed to stop beating. I looked at Luther, but he was terrified, no longer calm. "You were wrong. You can't open this door. You'll never get out." Suddenly, I realized, every time the girl in the black dress knocks on the door, it's a curse. Those who open the door for her will never be able to leave. They will live in the endless pursuit of this ghost, forever. The knocking sounded again, this time from outside the door. The knocking, gentle and slow, as if she was waiting for a response. Something was longing for acceptance. The cold storage door suddenly swung open. I couldn't believe my eyes. The girl in the black dress was standing there. We had entered. But now, she was not something we could escape from. Story 6. The Story of Hands and Blood. I live alone in apartment 602, an old building at the end of South Marlin Street in Pennsylvania. It's not exactly run down, but it's old enough that every step I take down the hallway makes the wooden floor creak like the sighs of ghosts trapped within the walls. Most of my neighbors are elderly, people who don't ask questions and don't notice the presence of others. I think that's why I chose this place. Quiet. No one cares. I'm an introvert. I work remotely, keep to myself, and don't go out unless I need to buy necessities. Everything was normal until about 3 weeks ago. It started with my right hand. I remember I was peeling an apple in the kitchen when suddenly the knife tilted and cut a deep gash across the back of my left hand. I dropped the knife, but my right hand still held on to it, as if something was trying to continue. At the time, I thought I was just distracted, maybe from being tired or stressed about work. But it wasn't that. On the second night, I woke up in the middle of the night. The living room was dimly lit by the light spilling in from the hallway. My right hand was holding a marker, and on the bathroom mirror, in hurried, sloppy handwriting, someone had written, "She needs to die." I can still remember the thick smell of ink and the sound of water dripping from the showerhead, even though I had locked it properly before going to sleep. I stood frozen for a long time, staring at myself in the mirror. But the reflection wasn't quite me. Not entirely. The face. It was me, yes. But the eyes were empty, cold, like no one was there. I took down the mirror and placed it face down against the wall. But the next night, a new mirror appeared, and the message was still there, as if it had been written again. I started keeping a journal, trying to find a pattern. It seemed like between 2 and 3 a.m. was when my right hand would act. Not always, but often enough to keep me awake at night. I tried tying my hand up before sleeping, but the next morning, the rope was neatly tucked under my pillow, cut cleanly. No blood, No scratches, just new words. I know she's listening. She? Who is she? Downstairs, there's a woman named Missy. In her 30s, works as a night nurse. We're not close, but she once borrowed my hairdryer when her power went out. Missy is the only person in the building who ever smiled and asked, "Are you okay?" When I dragged myself out tired, I started dreaming about Missy. In my dream, she was lying on my floor. Her eyes rolled back, and my right hand, was holding a knife, making deep cuts on her stomach. I didn't want to dream anymore. I was afraid to sleep. I started using high doses of coffee, energy drinks, anything to stay awake. But eventually, there were times I couldn't resist. Last Tuesday morning, I woke up and saw blood. It was everywhere. On the wooden floor, a long streak from the door to the living room, some on the bed sheets, and the kitchen knife was under the sofa. I stumbled to my feet, checked my body, but there were no wounds. It wasn't my blood. Panicking, I ran downstairs to find Missy, but her apartment was empty. The door wasn't locked. Inside, her coffee cup was still on the table, the water still warm, but there was no sign of her. No phone, no wallet, nothing to suggest she had left. I was about to call the police. I really was. But when I looked at my hand, specifically my right hand, I noticed bruises around my wrist, as if it had been held tightly by my left hand, mine. 3 days later, the police came to knock on my door. "We have a copy of the hallway camera footage," the officer said. "You were the last one to leave Missy's apartment the night she went missing." I shook my head. "No, I don't remember. I didn't." They showed me the footage. It was clearly me, or my body. I walked straight, my right hand holding something. It looked like a long kitchen knife, but what I couldn't bear to see was my expression in the footage. It was empty, soulless, exactly like the look I had seen in the mirror. "This was at 2:42 a.m., the officer said. "After this, no one saw Missy again. I wasn't arrested, not yet. No body, no direct evidence. But I know what happened. I just can't control it." Last night, the bathroom mirror once again had a new message. "She's not done yet. There's more." This time, it wasn't ink. It was blood. And this morning, another person in the building, the old lady in apartment 605, also disappeared. I'm writing these lines while my left hand trembles, and my right hand is tapping lightly on the table like a strange melody. I don't know how much longer I'll be myself, and if one day anyone sees me, please tie both my hands, or kill me before anyone else disappears. I tried everything I could. I tied my right hand with a steel chain, fastening a small lock, one meant for a gun chest. I even forced myself to sleep on my side, pressed against the wall, my back touching the cold, peeling paint, so that if I woke up in the middle of the night, I would know. But this morning, my hand unlocked itself. The lock was still in place, untouched, and the chain, smooth, without any cuts or breaks. I had begun to fear my own body. The police came back the next day, this time to ask more about the old woman on the 605th floor. Mrs. Irma Withers. They found her door ajar, the TV still on, but no one inside. Even stranger, there was a handprint on the screen. Not a full hand, but just the imprint of 4 fingers, missing the thumb. I could feel their eyes on me, longer than necessary. They hadn't said anything yet. No search warrant, but I knew they were waiting for a slip-up from me. They thought I was involved, and maybe they were right. That night, I didn't dare sleep. I made coffee and smoked constantly, even though I had quit in 2021. I paced back and forth in my apartment like a caged animal. Around 2 a.m., I began to hear something, a faint sound, like nails tapping against wood. Tap, tap, tap. I stopped, looked around. The sound was coming from the wall. I pressed my ear against the partition between my apartment and the one next door, where Missy used to live. The tapping continued. Clear, steady, not loud, but rhythmic, as if someone was trying to send a signal. I wanted to believe it was her, that somehow she was still alive. I grabbed a hammer and started pounding on the wall. Each blow echoed like thunder in the dead of night. Dust fell like mist. When I finally pried off a piece of the drywall, I found a mirror. No, it wasn't a mirror. It was the back of a bathroom mirror installed from the side of Missy's apartment. And on it, written in dried blood, were hurried words. I'm not her. I'm in the wall. Don't believe it. I stepped back. It felt as though someone had poured all the cold air of a freezer into my chest. My right hand started twitching. My middle finger curled as if it were holding something invisible. I tried to press it down, but it jerked harder. The bedroom door slammed shut behind me. I turned around and slowly walked toward it. On the bedroom mirror, the one I had sealed with black tape, there was nothing left. And it reflected, not me. It was a person, or an entity, standing behind me. Black, empty eyes, a mouth smiling with blood. I whipped around. There was no one. But my right hand once again was holding a knife. I called the psychology office. Anyone would do, as long as they could see me quickly. A woman named Dr. Lena Hoffman agreed to take me on. She worked at a small office north of Doylestown, about a 40-minute drive from where I lived. I arrived late in the afternoon. My head was pounding from not sleeping for 3 days. Her office was small, with a low ceiling, but warm. The smell of wood and lavender oil calmed my racing heart. You say your hand acts on its own? She asked, jotting quick notes in her book. I nodded. Do you feel like you have no control? Like you're hypnotized or dissociating? I told her everything. The writings, the mirror, Missy, Mrs. Withers. She didn't interrupt. She just nodded, her eyes gentle but deep. Have you ever heard of alien hand syndrome? She asked. I shook my head. It's a rare neurological disorder. The hand, usually the non-dominant one, acts on its own, without the person's control. In some cases, they feel like their hand has its own will. I whispered, I'm right-handed. She stopped writing, looked at me, and that's the hand that's controlling you. That night, I returned home, my mind spinning. I tried researching more about the syndrome, but everything I read couldn't explain. Who wrote those words? Who put the new mirror back each morning? Who, if not me, had disappeared 2 neighbors? Around 3 a.m., I suddenly woke up, not sure when I had fallen asleep. My mouth had a metallic taste. I rushed to the bathroom. My mouth was covered in blood. In the sink was part of a human tongue, still fresh, severed cleanly. I screamed, my right hand clenched into a fist, my fingers digging into my flesh, as if trying to keep a secret. I tried to wash it off, tried to flush it away, but the chunk of flesh moved slowly and horrifyingly, as if it didn't want to leave. The next morning, I received a message, not on my phone, but on my car's rearview mirror, a scrawled message in blood. Lena Hoffman, she knows too much. I felt my insides twist. My right hand, once again, was tapping in rhythm on the steering wheel. 4 even taps. Then it stopped. And then it started tapping again. 5 taps. This time. Harder? I gasped for air, but a thought flashed through my mind. Not mine. I knew it. Like a command carved into my spine. Lena needs to die. I shook my head violently. No. No. I won't do that. But my hand didn't listen. And the kitchen knife had been in the trunk of my car all along. I don't know why I drove to Dr. Lena's office at 3 a.m. No appointment, no legitimate reason, just the whisper in my head. A sound without words, without voice, without rhythm, but persistent, like water dripping through a crack in the wall. She knows. She will stop it. She must be silent. I kept repeating in my head, I won't do anything. I'm just here to warn her. Just to tell her. Lena is an expert. She will understand. She will help. But unconsciously, my right hand still reached for the trunk of the car, opening it out of habit. The knife was still there. No rust, no bloodstains, but the streetlights reflected on the sharp steel, and my chest tightened. I locked the trunk, left the knife behind. No need for it. At least, that's what I thought. The office was dark. The upstairs was dental. The downstairs, a small pharmacy, closed since 10 p.m. Only a motion sensor light in the hallway flickered like a sick heart. The front door of Lena's office was unlocked. That made me stop, hand on the door handle, my skin cold with fear. I gently pushed the wooden door. It creaked slightly, the sound tearing through the stillness. Inside, everything was the same as the last time I met her. Bookshelves, armchair, a watercolor painting hanging crookedly on the wall. Only one thing was different. The full-length mirror in the corner, the old wooden-framed one, was covered with a black cloth. But the cloth wasn't long enough to cover it completely. At the bottom, I saw a message. I walked over, pulled the cloth down. The mirror was cracked. Right in the center, a star-shaped crack spread out like a spider web. And between the cracks, written in dried blood, appeared the words, "She knew too late." I stepped back, bumping into the bookshelf. A book fell down. It was Lena's journal. I recognized her handwriting. I picked it up and opened to the last page. The handwriting was frantic. Letters stacked on top of each other, chaotic and uncontrolled. The patient shows signs of severe dissociation. But the most worrying thing is that I saw it. Not in his imagination, but for real. It looked at me through the mirror, and I'm not sure it belongs to him anymore. The next page was torn, or ripped. I wanted to leave. I had to leave. But as I turned back to the door, I suddenly heard something from the small room. The one Lena used to say was her private space, where she never saw guests. A whisper, thin as the wind, but I was sure it was a voice. I shakily pushed the door open. Inside were countless mirrors. They weren't like normal mirrors. No frames, no lights, just large glass panels standing upright, placed against the walls, making the room look like a maze of reflections. And in each mirror, I saw myself, but not completely. One mirror reflected me with blank white eyes. Another, my mouth stretched into a gaping smile, blood pouring from the corners of my mouth. Another, I was holding a knife, my right hand raised high. Then, in the last one, in the center of the room, I saw Lena. She was lying on the floor. her hands tied with the same rope I once used to tie myself. Her mouth was covered, her eyes wide open. She was still alive, her eyes moving frantically as if trying to say something. I rushed forward, but crashed into the mirror. I hit it hard. The mirror remained intact, no cracks. I screamed, "Lena!" In the mirror, Lena tried to shake her head. Behind me, the sound of breathing, damp and cold. I turned around. No one. Only my right hand moving as if someone else was controlling it. Each finger curled, abnormally. Not just twitching, but like it was writing. I looked down, on the floor, in blood. My hand was writing. Every door is a mirror. Every mirror is a door. I don't remember how I got out of there. Maybe I ran. Maybe I sleepwalked. But when I woke up, I was in my apartment. The knife was on the table. My phone had an unread message. No sender. Only a picture. It was Lena, but not the real Lena. It was a body with gouged out eyes, a mouth stretched wide, and the words carved deeply into her forehead. "Thank you for opening the way." I vomited, my body trembling. I tried calling the police, but the screen only displayed a message. "Unable to connect. You are out of range." I looked out the window, across the street, where the laundromat used to be. Now there was just a black wall. No lights, no cars, no people. The apartment was no longer in the town. I stood up, walked to the mirror, and saw my hand. My right hand, bleeding, but the blood didn't drip onto the floor. It dripped into the mirror. And in the mirror, behind me, was a room bathed in red light. Something was waiting for me to step through. All it needed was for me to put my hand in first. Story 7. The Gentle Laughter of the Dead. I don't remember how I got here. Maybe it was an ambulance. Maybe a family member brought me in. But when I woke up, I was lying in a pale white room with a high ceiling, peeling paint on the walls, and a flickering fluorescent light above me, like a tired eye blinking without rest. My name is Jacob White. I'm 34 years old and had been diagnosed with severe pneumonia after weeks of ignoring a persistent fever. When I came to, I realized I was no longer in the city hospital where I had been treated. There were no nurses, no hum of medical machines, only an oppressive silence, and the smell, that damp, rotting stench of time, of mold, and of death not yet fully gone. I tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness crashed over me, and I collapsed back onto the mattress. It was stiff and cold, as if no one had ever slept on it in decades. I turned my head, scanning the room. A rotting wooden table sat by the window. Atop it, a small photograph in a rusted metal frame. An old black and white picture of a woman with her hair neatly tied back, a gentle smile on her lips, but hollow eyes. And then I heard it. A soft laugh, smooth like silk, gliding across the skin, echoing from somewhere out in the hallway. It wasn't a real laugh, not the kind that comes from joy. It was something else. A hum of a soul drained of hope, like wind sighing through the teeth of someone who had just stopped breathing. I thought I was hallucinating. Maybe it was the medication or the fever. But that laugh, it came back. On the second night, at exactly 2:11 a.m., I woke with the overwhelming sense that someone was standing right outside my door. I heard no footsteps, but the laugh returned, closer this time, so close I could feel its breath slipping through the crack in the door. I wanted to call out, but in the 3 days I'd been here, I hadn't seen a single soul. No nurse, no doctor. Only once, The afternoon before, I glimpsed a little girl standing at the end of the hallway through my slightly ajar door. She wore a white dress, her head tilted slightly, as if listening to something. When I tried to speak, she vanished. By the third night, I decided to get out of bed. My body was so weak. Every step felt like I was dragging my soul behind me. The hallway stretched endlessly, ceiling lights shattered in places, casting pockets of darkness like open wells. I passed room after room, peering through the small glass windows on each door. All of them were empty. But there was something odd. Each room had a small photograph next to the bed. Portraits of different people, all smiling, all alone. Then I reached a door without a name. Only 3B, scrawled in what looked like dried blood-red ink. The door was ajar. I gave it a gentle push. This room was different. The bed was neatly made with crisp white sheets. No dust, no cobwebs. Only a photo frame placed on the pillow. It was me. I couldn't remember when the picture was taken, but it was unmistakable. My sunken eyes from illness, my faint, strained smile. The room began to spin. I stumbled back and fell. And when I looked up, laughter erupted from every direction, no longer soft, no longer gentle. A chorus now, from the walls, from inside the patient rooms, from the ceiling, from just beside my ear. I ran, though my lungs burned, though my legs trembled. I ran like hell itself had opened its mouth behind me. Back in my room, I slammed the door and dragged the bed to block it. But it was useless. The door didn't lock. And the laughter, it didn't stop. Even when I covered my ears. Even when I cried and begged. Then I realized something. That photo of me, it wasn't there before. Someone had placed it. Maybe the girl in the hallway. Maybe the soul still wandering this hospital. I opened the bedside drawer. There was a small notebook, its leather cover cracked with age. On the first page, a scrawled sentence. Patient 3B, unable to be discharged. The next pages were a journal. Not mine, but someone named Alan Griggs, written in 1963. He described the laughter, the strangers, seen through mirrors, the sleepless nights because someone was sitting at the foot of his bed. The last page bore a trembling line, ink dragged like a dying hand. If you're reading this, then maybe you're part of this place now. I didn't dare sleep. I sat all night, eyes locked on the door. And just before dawn, I saw her again. The little girl. She was in my room now, standing by the wall of photographs. No longer tilting her head, no longer blurry. Her face was clear, and her eyes, two empty hollows. She smiled, a smile as faint as the breath of the dead. Then she began to laugh softly, just like the sound I had heard. I screamed, and everything shattered into a cold, hollow dark. I don't know if I'm still alive or already dead. But one thing I know for sure, I'm not alone anymore. And tonight, I'll hear that laughter again. I don't remember how long I was unconscious. When I opened my eyes, a dim gray light filtered through the dusty window frame, casting strange, water-stained shapes across the ceiling. The room was still silent, but not the kind of silence that comes with emptiness. It was a lurking silence, as if dozens of breaths were being held in the dark, waiting for me to move so they could all exhale at once. I dragged myself toward the table, where the old journal still lay motionless. My hands trembled as I turned each page. The paper was yellowed, many pages stuck together by dampness and time. I read more carefully. These weren't merely the ramblings and complaints I had assumed at first. The later entries were fragmented, nearly hysterical, but they were also essential pieces of the horror that haunted this place. June 12th, 1963. I heard the laughter for the first time around 2 a.m. It came from the room next door, but when I asked the nurse, she said that room had been locked since 1958 after a fire killed a patient inside. Her name was Dorothy Langston. Dorothy Langston. The name sent an immediate chill through my blood. I vaguely remembered something about a photograph on the first page of the journal. I turned back, looking toward the framed picture I'd seen when I first woke up. My photo was gone. In its place was a woman, with neatly pinned hair, a gaunt face, and a smile. Identical to the one in the photo from the first room down the hall. Dorothy. I shivered and forced myself to keep reading. June 14th. I saw a little girl standing at the foot of my bed. Each night she gets a bit closer. I asked the doctor, and he just stayed silent and increased my sedatives. But the drugs don't work on this. I dropped the journal. Cold sweat ran down my spine. It couldn't be a mistake. That little girl. She was the same one I had seen. So who was she? A spirit or a reflection of someone who once existed? A click echoed from the hallway. I jumped, turning my head. One of the patient room doors was slowly opening. No one was there, but a strange compulsion urged me to get up and step outside. The hallway seemed longer than before. Or maybe it was just the feeling, because now the walls were covered in scratched messages, gouged in with fingernails. Don't let the laughter touch your heart. They don't know they're dead. If you look into the mirror, don't look away. I passed each door. Every room was the same, empty, dusty, with portraits of people who never really smiled. Then I came to a particular room. Its number had been scraped off completely, leaving only a charred imprint behind. The door was ajar. A strong burnt smell hit me instantly. I stepped inside. The walls were scorched, the iron bed frame twisted and glowing faintly, as if it had just come out of a furnace. On the floor, a piece of a white dress still smoldered, despite no signs of fire anywhere else. I looked around, and I saw her, Dorothy, standing in the corner of the room. Her back turned to me, head slightly tilted. Her skeletal hand held a cloth doll, its face half burned, no sound, no movement. But her presence was so overwhelming, it nearly stopped my breath. I don't know where I found the courage, but I spoke. Dorothy, she turned. Slowly. Her eyes were hollow, no pupils, no emotion. Then her lips curled into a faint smile, the same smile I had heard in the laughter last night. I stepped back. I just want to know what happened. She didn't answer, but she raised her hand and pointed toward the charred wall. Something was there, a human-shaped burn mark. I looked closer and recoiled in horror. It was the outline of a body burned alive, but not just one. Two, one large, one small. I turned back, but Dorothy was gone. I ran from the room. The hallway was changing. Lights were flickering off one by one. A door slammed shut behind me. The laughter returned, this time the giggles of a child, followed by whispering voices calling my name. Jacob! Jacob! I turned and ran, heading for the elevator. But when I reached it, the button panel had been pried open, wires hanging like the roots of a dead tree. At the far end of the corridor, I saw someone, a nurse. No, not quite. Her posture was twisted, a hunched back, a crooked shoulder, her head bobbing like a puppet. She wore an old hospital uniform with a name tag, Wills. She walked toward me, a shuffling limp in her steps, muttering, "Time for your injection, Jacob. Time for your injection." I spun around, bolted back into my room, slammed the door shut. This time I locked it with everything I could find: the bed, the table, even a small bookshelf. But the footsteps kept coming. The door trembled. She was still there, not leaving, not silent. "Time for your injection." I pressed my back to the wall, gasping. The journal was still in my hand. There was one last entry I hadn't read. June 20th. Dorothy wasn't alone. The girl was with someone, a nurse, the one who was supposed to care for her, but she left Dorothy to die in the fire. And now, they stay together, they laugh, and they never let anyone leave. The final page was torn out. I stood frozen, no longer sure if I was awake or dreaming. Outside the door, the footsteps had stopped, but above me, scratching sounds began. Scratch. Click. Scratch. Click. Not rats, not pipes, fingernails, so many fingernails, scraping the walls, the floorboards, the corners of my mind. I looked up at the ceiling. A small crack was slowly spreading, and from it, thick black blood began to drip onto my hand. I don't have much time left. The fever came back just before dawn. I remember sitting slumped on the floor, my back pressed against the wall, clutching the journal to my chest like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. The room was so cold that my breath turned to frost in the air, drawing thin trails of mist like hands reaching out. But it wasn't the cold that scared me. It was the absence of footsteps. Silence, when it returns, has its own way of tormenting the mind. It's not simply the lack of sound. It's the presence of something waiting, holding its breath alongside you. And you know it won't wait for long. The crack in the ceiling had widened. Blood kept dripping, soaking into the old bedsheet beneath me. But I didn't have the strength to scream anymore. My mind could only circle around one name: Wills, the nurse. I had to find out more about her. I had to understand why all of this revolved around room 3B, around Dorothy, around the photos that never changed, and the laughter that repeated each night. At twilight, I left the room, carrying the journal and a broken pencil. The hallway stretched endlessly, like a dream you can't wake up from. The doors remained shut, but now bore faint handprints on the glass. Some were reversed, as if someone, or something, had tried to escape from the inside. I followed cracked signs and rusted nameplates down to the records office. The hospital's archive room sat at the end of a shadowed hallway, where shattered windows cast grotesque shapes onto the walls. The door was ajar, unlocked. Inside it was pitch dark. I fumbled for the switch, but of course, no power. The only light came from the small bedside flashlight I'd brought. I began digging through dust-covered filing drawers. Langston? Dorothy? Her name was the first I found. Treatment records ended abruptly on June 15th, 1958, the night of the fire. No cause of death listed. Just 2 handwritten words: deceased on site. Right beneath that, the signature of the attending nurse, head nurse M. Wills. I searched further. Personnel records. Wills, Margaret. A thick file. A black and white ID photo. The same face, except this time, she wasn't bowing or tilting her head like the shadow I'd seen. She stared straight ahead with dead cold eyes. Notes underneath read, "Exhibits signs of fatigue during shifts. Previously accused of mistreatment of psychiatric patients. Unaccounted for during the hospital fire. and scribbled in red ink at the bottom corner, "Never sign resignation." A chill ran down my spine. She never left. I picked up the file, ready to head back, when I heard a soft rustle behind me. I froze. In the faint beam of the flashlight, I saw a tall shadow stretch across the wall. No footsteps, just that shadow, gliding. I turned quickly, but no one was there. When I looked back, the shadow had vanished from the wall. I bolted from the archive room, but as I reached the door, I froze. The hallway had changed. The walls were a different color. The glass windows were now cracked mirrors, reflecting scenes that weren't here. Burnt hospital rooms, a screaming girl, and the silhouette of a woman in a nurse's uniform leaning into the mirror, as if searching for someone. I ran, but every turn led me back to the same hallway. A loop. I started losing my sense of direction. The flashlight dimmed, then died completely. I sank to the floor, back against the wall, holding my breath. In the dark, I heard laughter. Soft, like before. Then a familiar voice spoke. "Time for your shot, Jacob." I opened my eyes. Before me, white shoes appeared from the shadows. Then a tattered nurse's gown. Then the face, half human, half scorched flesh, with glowing red eyes and a mouth stretched into an impossibly white smile, teeth curving inward. I screamed and ran. She chased me, not with footsteps, but with laughter. Every time I looked back, no one was there. But the laughter stayed right beside my ear. I burst into a random room. The door slammed shut behind me, like it closed on its own. Inside, there was only a large mirror. I looked into it and nearly passed out. I wasn't looking at myself. I was being watched from the other side, another version of me. No flesh. A pale, sunken face, hollow eyes, and it whispered, just like the voices I'd heard since that first night. "It's your turn now." I smashed the mirror. Glass exploded around me. No blood, only black smoke rising from the floor. The room twisted, gravity dissolving, and from nowhere, a chorus of laughter filled the air. Male, female, old, young, all blending into a single grotesque harmony. I crawled my way out. Somehow, I ended up back in room 3B. I locked the door, blocked it with everything I could find. I wrote everything down in this journal, not to understand anymore, but because I'm afraid no one will remember me tomorrow. And tonight, that laughter started earlier than ever. Nightfall. The laughter no longer echoes only at certain hours. It slips through every crack in the door, resonates from the walls, sometimes even creeping into my restless dreams, where every image is blurred, and the scent of burning smoke hangs in the air like a curtain that can never be pulled back. I don't know if I'm still alive out of fear, or if I'm already dead without realizing it. Every time I close my eyes, I see those eyes, the eyes of Dorothy, of Nurse Wills, of myself in the shattered mirror the other day. There's no difference. Every gaze is hollow, not angry, not resentful, just empty, as if their souls had been stripped away long ago. This morning, I woke up with a small cut on my wrist. Not deep, but enough for the blood to ooze slowly. What terrified me wasn't the cut, but the writing on the bed sheet next to me. The basement opens at 3 a.m. No one ever comes out. I looked at the clock. 2:57. I wanted to run from the room right then, but a part of me, the part that no longer knew fear, quietly stood up and opened the door. The hallway was pitch black, with only a few dim flickering lights. No more laughter. No more footsteps. Just the silence of a forest after the predator has fed. I walked like a sleepwalker down the hallway of the first floor. I vaguely remembered seeing a sign once that read Medical Storage Basement at the far end of the left wing. When I got there, the iron door was already wide open. No lock, no handle, just a gaping void, black as the throat of some creature waiting for me to step in, so it could close. I turned on my flashlight. The staircase leading down was an old spiral staircase, and every step led out a long, dragging creak, like someone scratching metal with their fingernails. The basement wasn't what I expected. No supply crates, no medical equipment. Instead, it was a narrow, low corridor with cracked concrete walls and a stench of dampness so thick it made me gag. The fluorescent lights were shuttered in intervals, leaving only faint beams of light seeping through cracks in the ceiling like bleeding moonlight. I walked a while before noticing a heavy metal door to the left. On it, a rusted sign read, Room 0, no entry without assignment. Below that, someone had scrawled in black paint, Where the hospital hides its pain. I reached for the handle. It was ice cold. When I gave it a gentle push, the door groaned like a dying animal. Inside was a room larger than I'd imagined, about the size of a classroom. The walls were lined with patient photographs. Hundreds of them, all black and white, all front-facing portraits. Every person bore a faint smile, but their eyes, dear God, their eyes were clouded white, as if every trace of life had been drained from them. In the center of the room stood a rusted hospital bed, restraints still coiled around the frame. On the mattress, a long-dried bloodstain had spread into the vague shape of a screaming figure. I approached. There was a thick notebook on the table beside the bed. I opened it. Medical log. Room 0. I skimmed through the first few pages. The scribbled handwriting of many different people, some in ink, some in graphite, and some looked like they'd been written in blood. Patient unresponsive to sedatives. Continued to laugh for 6 straight hours without blinking. Facial features distorted, but burns didn't spread. Patient called out Nurse Wills's name all night. Attempted IV injection. Patient suddenly awoke and asked, "Has the basement opened yet?" I flipped to the final page. There were no notes, just a single photograph. It was me, sitting on that very bed, smiling, eyes rolled white, and my cheek seemed to be bleeding from the inside. I stumbled back, hands trembling so hard I almost dropped the flashlight. Then I heard it, the sound of wheels rolling across the concrete behind me. I spun around. A 2-tiered medical cart was slowly approaching. On it were a large syringe, IV tubing, and an open file with my name at the top. Jacob White, patient room 3B, transferred to room 0. No one was pushing it. It moved on its own. Click, 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 like the ticking of a countdown. I ran. But when I reached the stairs, I saw something far more horrifying waiting at the first step. Her, Nurse Wills, but this time, she wasn't a shadow. She was whole, clear, and terrifyingly real. Her skin was peeling in patches, exposing raw red flesh as if she'd been burned alive. But her eyes, still sharp as blades, she smiled, syringe in hand. "Jacob, you skipped your treatment. I've come to finish it." I screamed and turned back, sprinting into the basement corridor. Lights burst out behind me, one by one. Laughter returned, layered, overlapping, deep, high, young, old. I don't know how long I ran, only that I finally crashed into another door, no nameplate. I opened it and found myself in a round room. The walls were covered in mirrors. Each mirror reflected a different version of me. One screaming, one laughing, one slitting his wrist, one engulfed in flames. And in all the mirrors, one figure wasn't me. It was Dorothy. She stood behind me, gently, and whispered, "They never let anyone leave." I didn't know how long I had been standing in that room full of mirrors. Maybe minutes, maybe hours. But every notion of time had shattered the moment I set foot in the hospital's basement. Here, every reflection was a trap, every echo, a psychological snare. Dorothy still stood behind me. Even without turning, I knew she was there. The sensation was as clear as a cold mist brushing my nape, sending shivers crawling across my skin. "They don't let anyone leave." Her voice echoed in the air like wind slipping through the cracks of the past. I turned around, but she was gone. Only one thing was certain. Every time she appeared, something terrible was about to happen. I looked into the mirrors again. One mirror didn't reflect anything. Its surface was pitch black, like it had been wrapped in a primal darkness that had never known light. I stepped closer and placed my hand on its icy surface, and it moved. The glass didn't break, didn't slide. It dropped, revealing a narrow, dim corridor stretching into the earth like the gut of some slumbering beast. I knew I had no choice. Behind me, the sound of hospital wheels echoed again. Then came the footsteps, heavy, uneven, dragging, as if the walker had a broken leg. Nurse Wills. I stepped into the corridor behind the mirror, and the door slammed shut behind me like the sky collapsing. Total darkness, no light, no way back. I fumbled through the darkness, my hands brushing against cold stone walls. Every few steps, I bumped into something soft and damp, like wet fabric, but upon touching it closely, I realized it was a hospital gown. Still warm, I wanted to scream, but I was terrified that if I opened my mouth, something might crawl in from the air itself. Finally, a faint light flickered in the distance. A pale yellow, like a dying candle. I lunged toward it like a drowning man reaching for a bubble of air. The room at the end of the corridor was small and square. Dozens of shattered bulbs dangled from the ceiling. Wires tangled like knotted hair after a nightmare. In the center was a staircase. Rusty iron steps leading to a large door with a corroded handle. A sign dangled above. "Exit for those whose names haven't been called." I didn't understand. Those whose names haven't been called? I placed my hand on the door handle. Instantly, the entire room trembled. From the walls came the howls. Not screams, but names being called out. Jacob. Jacob White. Jacob, a whisper breathed directly into my ear. Your name has been called. There's no way back. I pulled the handle. Nothing. I pounded on it. I screamed. I threw my whole shoulder into it. But the door stayed still, as if fate itself had welded it shut. Behind me, the wheels rolled again. But this time, there was breathing. Ragged, wet, rushed. I turned and saw her. Nurse Wills. Her eyes were rolled white, one side of her face torn open to the ear. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. She just raised a syringe. Its liquid thick and black, bubbling like it was boiling. I stumbled backward, caught my foot on a floor feline. I fell. She lunged like a starving beast. Just as the needle was about to plunge into my chest, a piercing scream erupted from the corner. Stop! It was Dorothy. She rushed from the shadows, slamming into her. They both crashed down, and in that split second, I saw something I'd never seen before. Dorothy's eyes filled with rage. She was no longer a victim. She was the guardian. I scrambled up, dashed to the door, and this time, it opened. Without hesitation, I leapt through. I woke up in a white room. No more blood. No more shadows. No more laughter. Beside me stood a young nurse, her eyes wide with shock. You're awake. My God. You've been missing for nearly a week. They said no one could find you at the old hospital. I was stunned, my mouth bone dry. And the hospital? That building I was in? The nurse hesitated. Rivergate Hospital was demolished in 1983. The place burned to the ground. There's nothing left. I was speechless. A small object fell from my pocket. A photo. Dorothy. She wasn't smiling anymore. She stared straight at me, eyes serene. And behind her, the shattered mirror room. I don't know how I escaped, or if I truly did. But every night, exactly at 3 a.m., I hear soft laughter by my ear, and a whisper that says, "The exit is not meant for the living." Story 8, Draining Life Through the Skin. My name is Michelle Carson. I'm 32 years old, living in Seattle, Washington. A few months ago, I started noticing the first signs of aging on my face. Fine lines around my eyes, and a complexion no longer as firm and radiant as before. Working as a front desk clerk in the hotel industry, appearances play a huge role in keeping VIP guests happy. That pressure made it hard to ignore the whispered advice from a former co-worker. Her name was Riley, about a secret spa called Luster Bloom. No flashy ads, no official website, just word of mouth. But Riley swore by it. Just one session, and it's like your skin resets itself. The strange part was how she said it. Voice trembling, eyes unable to meet mine. When I asked when she'd last gone there, Riley simply shook her head. I don't remember, but I still dream about the sound of that machine. I figured she was exaggerating, like so many women who had tried dozens of skincare products without satisfaction. Luster Bloom was tucked away inside an old building on the 3rd floor. Its sign looked hand-painted in flaking white paint, with no lights to illuminate it. I nearly turned back when I saw the rotting wooden door and the rusted doorknob. But then a gentle voice called out behind me, "Miss Carson?" I spun around. It was a middle-aged Asian woman, petite, with her hair tied in a neat bun. She introduced herself as Yen, the spa's manager. Her eyes were as cold as midnight air, but her voice was soft and composed. She welcomed me inside without even asking for my name, as if she already knew I'd come. The reception area was lit with scented candles, a blend of sandalwood and something else. Something vaguely burnt. There were no other customers. Everything was uncomfortably still. Yen led me down a narrow hallway, the wooden floor creaking beneath our feet. The treatment room was at the end of the hall, and that's where I saw it. A dull black machine, about shoulder height, shaped like a cross between a salon chair and a dentist's chair. Transparent tubes ran along its frame like veins, connecting to a container in the back. Inside it, a dark, murky liquid swirled. "Its name is Lumiere," Yen said, placing a hand on it like she was touching a living being. "European technology. Unofficial, but far more effective than anything you've ever tried." I hesitated, but Yen's calm demeanor convinced me. Though the machine emitted a faint hum, like whispers echoing from a deep cave. I laid down on the chair, attaching the tubes to my temples and the base of my neck, just as instructed. At first, there was only a cool tingling sensation, like cold air brushing across my skin. But after a few minutes, I felt something. A subtle pull, as if something shapeless, nameless, was being drawn out from within me. I opened my eyes and looked at the mirror mounted on the ceiling. My reflection appeared hazy, as if light itself was being drained from me. But then the machine chimed, a soft ting, and the session was over. Yen unhooked the tubes and wiped my forehead with a warm towel. "You'll notice the effects clearly in half a day," she said, smiling. A crooked, unsettling smile. The next morning, I awoke in a state of complete exhaustion. My body felt utterly drained, though my face did look smoother, tighter. My eyes were shadowed, and my lips had turned pale. I checked the mirror again, and my heart nearly stopped. My reflection was fainter than I was in real life. I rubbed my eyes, but nothing changed. I saw myself as a version fading away, a ghost of edges and outlines. When I turned from the mirror, I swear the reflection stayed a few seconds longer, still watching me, reluctant to leave. 2 days later, I returned to Luster Bloom, not for beauty, but for answers. But the spa was gone, no trace of it ever being there. The door was locked with a rusted padlock, the handle thick with dust. I asked the florist on the ground floor, and he frowned. Spa? That third floor's been abandoned since 2019. I stood frozen, trembling with dread. Riley never replied to my texts again. I began searching for other clients of the spa, scouring private skincare forums. A woman named Isabel Tran had left a comment last year about a horrifying experience at a spa that only opens at night. I reached out, and surprisingly, she agreed to meet, on the condition that I visit her home during the day. Her apartment was in a quiet suburb of Tacoma. The front door was lined with charms, wind chimes, and small mirrors facing outward. Isabel didn't seem delusional, but her eyes were sunken, her skin leathery and parched. Despite her being only 28, "That machine doesn't rejuvenate. It feeds on your vitality," she said, her frail fingers trembling around a cup of tea. "And if you let it take from you more than 3 times, you're not human anymore." I said nothing. My throat had gone cold. Isabel rolled up her sleeve, revealing a faint indentation on her arm, like a fingerprint permanently pressed into her skin. I once saw a girl after her 3rd session. Her reflection started to dissolve like smoke. And her real body, her hair fell out, her nails detached, her teeth changed color. They call it the faded mirror ritual. I left Isabel's home in the cold rain. Sitting in my car, I checked the rear-view mirror, and my reflection was still not clear. Each day, it fades a little more. I can't tell anyone. Who would believe me? But one thing is certain. That machine is not just a device. It's alive. It chooses, and it demands obedience. Something is watching me, through my skin, waiting for the moment I no longer have the strength to resist. And in the mirror, every night, there's another Michelle, smiling slowly back at me. But that is no longer me. I don't remember how long it took me to step out of the car that day. Rain lashed against the windshield like it was punishing the world. I just sat there, eyes fixed on the rearview mirror, where my faint reflection grew dimmer with each passing minute. It wasn't just the fogged glass. I could feel it, something quietly draining me, as if an invisible, ice-cold hand was pulling my life force away, pulse by pulse. I didn't sleep that night. I turned on every light in the house, taped over every mirror, even the small one in the bathroom. I didn't dare look at any reflective surface again, because I was afraid I'd see it, that thing starting to take shape behind my image. It was no longer just a shadow. It had form. The next morning, I called the management office of the building where Luster Bloom used to be. A woman named Monica Dean picked up. Her tone was brusque, clearly uncomfortable, discussing the third floor. When I mentioned I had visited the spa there, the line went silent for a long time. "Are you all right?" she finally asked, like I had just survived something traumatic. I pressed her further, and she reluctantly agreed to meet me at a nearby cafe. I arrived early, bringing a stack of notes, names of users who had commented on Luster Bloom in old forums. Most were fake handles, or accounts that no longer existed. Monica showed up dressed modestly, wearing a wide-brimmed hat, even though it wasn't sunny. She sat across from me and sighed, as if this burden had been pressing on her for years. "You're the 13th person who's asked me about that spa in the last 3 years," she said, voice dropping. And none of them ever followed up. A few disappeared. Some were found, but couldn't recognize themselves anymore. I asked her about the equipment used in the spa. "Lumiere," I said. Her eye twitched at the name. "It's not a machine," she replied. "It's the leftover remnant of an ancient ritual. I once snuck up to the third floor after a janitor complained about moaning sounds at night. When I entered the therapy room, I saw the cables were still active, even though the power was off. I couldn't breathe for a few seconds. I stood in front of the large mirror on the wall," she continued, "and I saw myself being pulled downward. Not literally, but my reflection. It looked like it was drowning, struggling beneath deep water. That detail reminded me of a name Isabel had once vaguely mentioned, Dr. Alain Rousseau, the inventor of the Lumiere device. He had been banned from practicing medicine in France for experimenting on comatose patients using prototype machines. No one knew his whereabouts after 2016, but I found a lead. An old blog post from a site focused on dark medical devices, referring to Rousseau as the modern prophet of soul mirror sorcery. I contacted the blog author, an elderly man named Howard Glass, living in New Orleans, who specialized in studying obscure religious cults. At first, he refused to meet, but then I sent him the blurred mirror photo I had managed to capture, a photo that caused my phone camera to glitch and shut down immediately after. When the phone turned back on, the image had turned completely black. But I mailed him a printed version, and he replied right away, "You're being watched. What you call Lumiere doesn't just drain vitality. It creates a copy, a soul copy." 2 days later, I flew to New Orleans. Howard lived in a weathered little house, packed with books and old talismans hanging from the ceiling. He opened the wooden door, let me in, then bolted 3 locks behind us. "Your reflection is no longer synchronized," he said the moment he saw me. "You're fading because the soul copy is getting stronger. Once it has enough energy, you'll be nothing but a shell, and it will replace you completely." I shivered. There's only one way to stop it, Howard said. You must find the original mirror, where the ritual was first performed. That mirror is called the speculum demonis. You have to destroy it. If not, the copy will keep hunting for new victims. We began digging through original records and uncovered something. Lusterbloom used to be the headquarters of a small cult called the Pale Order, active underground in the 1970s. One of their main rituals was reflection stripping. They believed immortality could be achieved by absorbing energy from others' reflections using enchanted mirrors. A rare photo of the original mirror appeared in a police report from 1982 related to the mass self-immolation of 6 cult members. The mirror was confiscated, but the report didn't mention where it was stored. There was only one name tied to the investigation: Eugene Carrick. We tracked Eugene down. He now lived in a retirement home in Spokane, Washington. When Howard and I visited, he was nearly 90 in a wheelchair, but his eyes were sharp and alert. I showed him the blurry mirror photo. His hands trembled. Then he murmured, "It's still alive. It never left. I saw it in the mirror, and it saw me." Story 9. The Ghost That Kills Through Dreams. I moved into apartment 3B at Maple Heights in early winter. December in Tacoma, Washington is cold to the bone, but somehow this place felt even colder than outside. It wasn't the cold of snow or wind, but something deeper. A chill that settled in the chest, persistent, dull, and disturbingly familiar. The apartment was small. Beige walls, an old gray carpet, flickering fluorescent lights, but I didn't need much. For someone who'd just broken up with his girlfriend, lost his job, and was teetering on the edge of financial ruin, this was a last refuge. All I wanted was quiet, and I was grateful just to have that. My name is Eric Monroe. I'm 32. I used to teach American literature at a high school. Now, I'm nothing. I arrived at Maple Heights with just a few boxes of clothes, some old books, and a black cat named Milo. The landlord, Dolores, a raspy-voiced, cloudy-eyed old woman, handed me the keys and said only one thing: "Don't leave the window open at night. That's where it always starts, with the wind." I had no idea what she meant. I didn't care either. The first few days passed quietly. I tried to rewrite a manuscript that had been rejected by 3 publishers. At night, I read on the couch while Milo curled up beside me. The place was peaceful, except for the footsteps I sometimes heard past midnight from the apartment above. I figured they belonged to my upstairs neighbor, a thin, long-haired guy named Leo. I once saw him in the elevator. His eyes were hollow, like someone who hadn't slept in weeks. When I nodded to greet him, he whispered, "If you dream of someone killing you, don't wake up." I froze, about to ask what he meant, but the elevator doors opened, and he walked out without looking back. The first strange dream happened on my 5th night there. I dreamed I was standing in my own kitchen, but everything was pitch black. The only light came from the open refrigerator, casting a pale glow. In my hand was a paring knife, and in front of me was Nick, my best friend from college, the one who pulled me out of depression after my mother died. He was smiling, but his eyes were full of tears. I don't remember exactly what happened next. Just blood, everywhere, splattered across the sink, and a scream, ragged and distant, like it came from some deep basement far away. I shot awake, heart pounding like a drum. Milo was curled up on my chest, whimpering softly. I reached up and wiped my face. Cold sweat, but then I realized my hands were covered in blood. Not sweat, real blood. Panicking, I stumbled into the bathroom and scrubbed my hands furiously. Where had the blood come from? I checked myself. No wounds. Then I looked into the sink and saw a hair. Long, brown, not mine. I couldn't sleep the rest of the night, and I had no explanation for what had happened. The next morning, I asked the building manager about it. He just shrugged. Third floor, huh? Strange thing. 4 tenants who lived in that unit before you. All died sleepwalking. 1 jumped off the balcony. 1 slit their throat. 1 drowned themselves in the toilet. I swallowed hard. And the last one? Leo, the one still alive. The following night, I locked Milo in the bedroom, locked the front door, and tried to stay awake with coffee. But by 3 a.m., I was dreaming again. This time it was Nick, but in a different place. It looked like the basement of the old university library. I was chasing him, still holding the knife, my breath ragged, fluorescent lights flickering overhead. A voice came out of the dark. Stab him, or he'll kill you. I woke up with my heart hammering so hard, it hurt my chest. I was still on the couch, but this time, the knife in my hand wasn't a dream, and the blood on my shirt was real. I called Nick, no answer. 3 hours later, I got a text from an unknown number. Nick was just found dead in his apartment in Seattle. Multiple stab wounds. I didn't understand. I hadn't left my apartment last night, but I dreamed it. And now, it had become real. I went to see Leo. He lived upstairs, in apartment 5D, the one I always heard footsteps from in the middle of the night. When he opened the door, he looked like he hadn't slept in a month. Eyes bloodshot, lips cracked. You woke up with blood on you, didn't you? I nodded. He pulled me inside, bolted 3 locks behind us, then pointed to a wall covered in bizarre drawings. Eyeballs, cryptic symbols, and scraps of paper scrawled with phrases like, "They kill through dreams. They feed on memories. The more afraid you are, the stronger they become." This isn't just sleepwalking, Leo said. It's something else. Something that lives inside our dreams. When you dream of killing someone, it's not just a dream. It's using you, controlling you. And if you resist it, it kills you in the dream. And if that happens, you don't wake up. I shuddered. So what do I do? Don't sleep alone. And if you ever dream of yourself being killed, don't wake up. That night, I locked every door and wrote a note beside my pillow. If I die in the dream, don't wake up. This time, the dream came fast, like I'd fallen into another dimension. In the dream, I saw myself, a duplicate version of me, but its face had no eyes. It stood in the living room, holding a knife, blood dripping from its hand. I turned and ran, but the walls stretched endlessly. I hid beneath the dining table, hearing footsteps drawing closer. And then, it stabbed. I jolted awake, chest burning like I'd really been pierced. But I was alive. I broke down and cried. Then, the doorbell rang. I stepped out. The door creaked open. Outside was Nick, but he wasn't Nick anymore. He smiled. Blood streamed from his eyes down to his chin. "You killed me. Now it's my turn, Eric." I don't remember how long I stood there. The door was still open. The shadow wearing Nick's face stood motionless in the doorway. Blood streamed from his eyes, but his lips held a twisted grin. Not the kind a living person makes, but a cold, hollow, hate-filled smile of something that had died but hadn't left. I backed away slowly, heart pounding like it would burst out of my chest. "Nick," I whispered, though deep down I knew it wasn't him anymore. There was no answer, only that piercing gaze from the thing that wore him. Then suddenly, Nick vanished. No footsteps, no breeze. As if he had never been there at all, I collapsed to the floor, shaking, cold sweat pouring from my forehead. Milo growled from the corner of the room, eyes locked on the hallway beyond the door, where I didn't dare to look back. The next morning, I went to find Leo, but apartment 5D was empty. The door stood ajar. Inside, there was nothing but a musty smell and faint soot stains across the ceiling. No note, no sketches filled with symbols on the walls. It was like Leo had never lived there. I called his number, out of service. Asked the front desk. They said, "There's never been a Leo living in 5D. I didn't know what was real anymore. That same day, I received a package left at my door. No return address. Inside was a journal. The cover was stained with dried blood. The pages inside were brittle and torn, some of them ripped out. On the first page, scrawled in shaky handwriting, "These are the things I remember, before I was no longer me." I flipped through the rest. The handwriting grew more chaotic with each entry, as if the writer was slowly losing their mind. They didn't kill me with hands, but with dreams. They borrow bodies to complete the death that began in the subconscious. The dead one is the last to dream, not the one who kills. Near the end was a roughly drawn map, a basement, a wooden door, and a note. Apartment 1A, the door beneath the floor. I didn't want to believe it, but a part of me knew if I wanted to escape this, I had to go down there. I had to find the route. Apartment 1A was on the ground floor, sealed with red tape and a sign that read, "Temporarily unavailable due to technical issues." I broke in past midnight, picking the lock with a hairpin, a skill I'd learned during a stupid college party night. Inside was thick with dust. The scent of mold and rust made me nauseous. I searched for over an hour before I found the slit in the old carpet. When I pulled it back, there was a small wooden door beneath it, with a rusted brass handle. I hesitated for a few minutes, then opened it. Below was a rotting wooden staircase, descending into a pitch-black basement. I took a flashlight and stepped down. The basement was no bigger than a small living room, the walls lined with cold stone bricks. In the center stood a tall mirror, almost reaching the ceiling. No frame, no fingerprints. I stepped closer. The mirror didn't reflect me. Instead, in the glass, I saw Nick. He was sleeping, his face peaceful. Next to him was me, also sleeping. I was holding a knife, walking closer, and repeating the same dream I'd had the first time. I staggered back, horrified. On the wall beside the mirror, phrases were scratched in with fingernails, shredded and desperate. "The killer in the dream is not the one who wakes up. They use dreams to enter this world. Don't look into the mirror at 3:33 a.m. I looked at the clock. 3:28. I ran from apartment 1A like a madman. That night I didn't sleep. I set up a camera in the bedroom. Alarm set to go off every 10 minutes, but I still dozed off without realizing. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in my bedroom anymore. I was back in the basement. The mirror stood in front of me. Inside it, I saw a strange room. No windows, 4 moldy walls, and a woman sitting on a wooden chair, hair hanging down, her back facing me. I tried to turn her around. In dreams, every movement feels like lifting lead when I touched her shoulder. She slowly turned. No face, just a smooth, pale surface like wax. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. But I heard the whisper leaking from it. "Wake up and die with me." I screamed, tried to sit up, but couldn't. I was tied to the dream like a puppet. She moved closer, knife in hand. I felt the cold blade press against my neck, and then I woke up. The knife was still in my hand, and on my neck, a small cut, lightly bleeding. I don't know if I'm awake or still dreaming. I checked the footage from the camera I set up. At 3:33 a.m., I saw myself sit straight up in bed, eyes lifeless, holding the knife, walking toward the camera, and then staring directly into the lens. Behind me was the faceless woman. After that night, I sealed every mirrors in the house. Even the warped reflection from a silver spoon or the bathroom's rear-view mirror made me uneasy. Mirrors no longer served as reflections. To me, they had become gateways. Gateways through which something was quietly watching, waiting to slip through. But the fear didn't stop there. It spread. Every time I closed my eyes, the echoes returned. The sound of blades slicing, the hiss of breath being cut from a throat, and the faceless voice whispering into my ear. "We are aligning, Eric. Soon, you won't know who you are anymore." I began losing track of time. Some days I woke up in mud-stained clothes with no memory of where I'd been. Milo vanished for 3 days, then came back on his own. His claws cracked, red scratch marks on his back. I checked the camera footage, but every night, from 3:30 to 3:45 a.m., the video was distorted, violently shaking. Each time, at the end of the footage, I saw myself standing in the middle of the room, face turned away, and always, a shadow passing by the edge of the screen. I decided to visit the old psychiatric hospital on the east side of the city. According to Leo's journal, this place once treated a string of patients diagnosed with personified dream disorder, a rare term no longer used in modern medicine. Medical records from 2004, secretly copied by a now retired nurse named Geraldine, revealed a disturbing pattern. 5 female patients, all with the same symptoms: sleepwalking accompanied by violent behavior during dreams. All 5 claimed they were being forced to dream of the same woman, a faceless figure, and all 5 had once lived in the same place, Apartment 1A, Maple Heights. The name of the last patient chilled me. Clara Whitmore. The faceless woman might have been real. According to an old article in the Tacoma Tribune, Clara Whitmore was the head nurse at the hospital during the 1980s. She vanished without a trace in 1989. The same night, a mysterious fire destroyed the hospital's basement. 3 patients died in the blaze, trapped in a locked room. One survived, though mentally shattered, repeating only one sentence. Clara didn't let them wake. Clara kept their souls in sleep. After the incident, the hospital shut down. Clara was never found, but starting in 1991, the first sleep-related deaths were recorded in Apartment 1A of Maple Heights. I began to understand. The mirror in the basement was the seal, a vessel for Clara's final memory. A place where she, or what remained of her, fed on the dreams of those who lived there. Not everyone died. Only those who saw themselves in the dream and couldn't escape. That night, I decided to try something. I called out to Clara. I wrote her name on the bathroom mirror with lipstick. A desperate idea. But I had nothing left to lose. I turned off the lights, lit a small candle, and waited. At exactly 3:33 a.m., the mirror rippled like the surface of water. I saw my reflection, but warped, floating, like a sleepwalking version of myself. Behind me, the faceless face appeared again, but this time, I didn't run. I stared straight at the space where the face should have been and whispered, "Clara, I know you're trying to return, but not through me, not through anyone else." She paused. Then she smiled. A crack appeared in the mirror. I woke up the next morning, lying on the bathroom floor, blood trickling from my temple, but the lipstick writing was gone. And in the mirror, it was just me again. Normal, no Clara, no blood, no shadows. I thought it was over, until I got an email from Leo. The sender's address was a single line. Mirror, boundersleeplock.net subject line. You can't erase a dream just by waking up. Attached was a video, a recording of me in my own apartment, walking out of my bedroom at 3:33 a.m., holding a knife. But this time, I wasn't heading toward the camera. I was walking toward Milo. A cat's screech echoed. Then the image cut to black. At the end of the email, a note. Each time you think you're awake, it's just another layer of the dream. Clara doesn't need to enter the real world. She only needs us to believe she's real. And from there, the dream becomes reality. I started questioning everything. Am I truly awake? Or am I trapped in another layer? Where sleep is the prison, and I'm the warden. I tried cutting my hand, screaming, turning off all electronics. Nothing could convince me I was truly conscious. And tonight, as I type these words, I hear the knocking again. 3 knocks, each one spaced exactly 33 seconds apart. Last time, it was Nick. This time, it's me. The me inside the mirror, waiting for me to open the door.